181. Treasures and bargaining chips in the underground world. Beside the scrap heap, the air stung of burning metal and the hiss of cooling steel. The goblin captain knelt on the ground in the most submissive posture he could assume, waiting for the divine envoy's next command. Jason said nothing. He held the mental link like a patient angler, trawling the murky current of other minds for valuable fragments. Confused images crashed into him. Endless dark tunnels like the Earth's veins leading into unknown depths, glowing fungi, underground rivers flowing with lava, and strange plants that pulsed with a vivid life force. Beneath those grand visions, though, there was a deeper, more primitive fear, an immeasurable shadow stirring under the rock. It was the limit of the goblins' technology and courage. Jason understood. These goblins were like children guarding a treasure room. They were too frightened to enter because a ferocious dog sat at the threshold. "You want those plants," Jason said silently through the link, "but you're afraid of what's below." His will, exact as a surgeon's scalpel, cut into the goblin captain's core desires and fears. The captain trembled and kowtowed harder. "Divine envoy, great divine envoy, the demon underground devours everything." Fragmented thoughts assembled into a clear picture. They both coveted and feared the vast subterranean world beneath them. It held spiritual plants said to prolong life, but it also harbored terrors that even their prideful drilling mechs could not defeat. "It seems we've found a good entry point," Jason murmured to Harry and the others behind him as he relaxed the mental link. He turned to the goblin. "I can help you take that land, but I need to meet the one who truly holds power here." The captain's eyes flared with ecstasy. Conquer the land, a divine promise. He scrambled to his feet, gibbering excitedly, and barked urgent orders to his crew. With trembling reverence, his squad escorted Jason and his companions toward the heart of their civilization, Cogwheel City. Cogwheel City was an industrial settlement inside a vast underground cavern. Giant gears formed the city's foundations, steam pipes coiled along rock faces like colossal serpents, and the constant clang of metal and hiss of steam made the place a noisy machine city. The goblin escort threaded Jason's group through chaotic, greasy streets to a fortress assembled from discarded boilers and iron plates. This was the palace of the goblin chieftain. The leader who awaited them was no ordinary goblin. Taller than the rest, attired in an ostentatious technician's suit bristling with gauges and brass tubing, he leaned on a scepter fashioned from a massive piston. He was the great artificer chieftain, Gallywix, ruler of their civilization. There was none of the awestruck reverence other goblins showed. His gaze was that of a calculating merchant. "A divine envoy from the surface?" he said, inspecting Jason with thinly veiled suspicion. "I only believe in gears that make profit and explosives that level mountains. Gods? They're the toys of the weak." He struck his scepter on the floor with a heavy thud. "So what do you want? Or better, what can you give me?" "I can give you what you most desire," Jason replied calmly. Gallywix snorted. "I desire many things. For example, that black gold ore vein to the east, blocked by the petrified rockworm. That damned beast's eaten 3 of my elite drilling mechs already." He narrowed his eyes, throwing down a challenge he expected no one could meet. "Divine envoy, if you can rid me of that worm and free the vein, free indeed, then perhaps we can speak of you taking the chieftain's position." The words were humble, but the mockery was clear. To him, it was an empty promise. Jason ignored the taunt and asked, "Do the spiritual plants grow near that vein?" Gallywix's pupils narrowed. "So my captain told you everything," he scoffed. "Yes, they're there, but seeing's not touching." Jason's outward calm hid a series of silent commands to Zero. "Zero, scan the chieftain's scattered thoughts. Pull any morphological data on spiritual plants and cross-reference the Arcane Codex. Scan complete. Extracting information. Comparing with database. Comparison successful. Target 1. Earthcore Dragonshade. An ancient magical flora, long thought extinct. Roots are a core ingredient for the high-grade potion Dragon's Might. Market value, immeasurable. Target 2. Crystallized Bloodvine. Properties unknown. Suspected super-grade alchemical material. Market value, enough to buy several goblin kingdoms. Even Jason felt a thrill. Legendary materials, lost to the magical world for millennia, right here. He kept his face composed, masking excitement with the cool curiosity of a scholar. He tapped the air and summoned two vivid holographic images into the center of the hall. One, a deep purple plant with dragon-like gnarled roots. The other, a translucent vine like crystal with a slow, blood-like flow within. This is? Gallywix rose for the first time looking genuinely shocked. The images matched the ancient blueprints he had seen, and then Jason dismissed them. Just these things, Jason said, tone casual and slightly dismissive. I've seen similar entries in old texts. They contain some faint life energy and have interesting structures, useful for certain personal research. They're not particularly valuable as raw materials. The chieftain's inner calculations collapsed. He had prepared himself for someone who would identify these plants as priceless relics and demand an obscene price. Instead, Jason's display of knowledge paired with devaluation had trapped him. The envoy both knew what the plants were and insisted they weren't worth much. Good. Jason looked at the stunned leader and nodded. I will deal with the petrified rockworm. In return, I want your most precious treasure. Relief flooded Gallywix, and he was about to accept when Jason added with a shrug, as if it were an afterthought. Oh, and since you can't harvest those spiritual plants anyway, grant me exclusive mining rights to them. Consider them weeds I pull up while clearing the vein. Weeds? The absurdity should have insulted him, but instead it thrilled the chieftain. Trading a few weeds and the price he had already agreed to for the ore vein was a windfall. Fearing a change of heart, he hammered his scepter down and proclaimed loudly, "Deal, divine envoy, deal." A stage opened to wealth and power. Solving the petrified rockworm problem would let Jason reveal real miracles to the goblin civilization, and those weeds handed over as a bonus would be shipped up from the deep for Jason's use, generation after generation, a small thing to Gallywix, but a monumental prize for the divine envoy. 182. The Stage of Miracles. Chief Gallywix, the great tinkerer, a ruler famed in the goblin world for his cunning and pragmatism, now looked at Jason with an expression that had shifted from suspicion to something like reverence, awe braided with fanatic devotion. He personally led the way, humble as any low apprentice, respectfully escorting Jason and his party onto a steam-powered lift platform driven by giant brass gears and thick iron chains. Squeaks and rumbles accompanied the motion. With the grating cry of metal and the sharp hiss of high-pressure steam leaking from joints, the platform began its slow descent, shuddering as it went. Hot air, laced with coal dust and machine oil, rose from the bottomless shaft like the breath of the deep earth. Gallywix's voice, hoarse over the roar, trembled with unhidden fear and reverence. "Divine envoy, you may not know," he said, "that thing buried in our richest black gold mine. We call it the petrified rockworm. It is not merely a creature. It is the earth's wrath made flesh." He pointed into the heart-stopping darkness below. To open that mine, we put Cogwheel City's finest engineers to the task, and our greatest creation, the Earth Tooth. When he named the machine, pride and grief flashed across the chief's face. The Earth Tooth had been the pinnacle of their technology, their ultimate weapon for conquering the underground. It was an indestructible drilling mecha. Its main drill bit, forged and refined 100 times over and tipped with fine gold, could pierce the hardest granite within an hour. Its steam core could power an entire city. We thought nothing could stop it. We even planned to pilot it down to challenge the ancient gods rumored to sleep near the planet's core. His voice swelled with fervor, then collapsed into a bottomless dread. But before the petrified rockworm, it was like a fragile tin toy. He held up two trembling fingers, emphasizing the instant that changed everything. One strike. In a single instant, the Earth Tooth was torn clean in half. We lost 32 of our best technicians and pilots, our brightest minds and bravest hearts. Not a single intact piece of wreckage could be recovered. Gallywix's account painted an almost invincible nightmare in Harry and the others' minds. The deeper the lift descended, the heavier the oppression in the air grew. It was a purely elemental pressure originating from the Earth plane. Even small rock fragments began to flake off the tunnel walls as if crushed by some invisible weight. The environmental stabilization amulets on Harry and the others' chests flared with a soft, visible light, isolating the crushing gravity and making them feel as light as if they stood on level ground. After a final jolt like a falling giant, the platform reached its destination. A gust of wind carrying dense earth element residue, the tang of rusted metal, and a faint, iron-like stench washed over them. Before them yawned a cavern beyond accurate description, vast enough to hold more than a dozen Hogwarts great halls. The dome was lost in shadow, studded with enormous clusters of crystals that threw a cold blue glow like an inverted starfield, bathing the subterranean world in eerie, shifting light. In the center lay a tangle of monstrous metal wreckage, a steel tomb that told the tale of past disaster. That was the Earth Tooth, the pride of goblin civilization, ripped in half with brutal force. Where the cockpit had been, the wreckage caved inward like a mouth frozen in a scream. All the goblins, even Chief Gallywix himself, stared at the deepest part of the cavern with a fear that reached into their souls. The petrified rockworm had not revealed itself fully. What was visible already defied the concept of a living thing. A segment of its body, like a rolling black mountain range, was embedded seamlessly into the mine wall at the far end of the cavern, as though it had grown there since creation and fused with the earth plane itself. Its carapace was pitch black and mirror smooth, etched with ancient patterns like geological growth rings. Under the crystal light, the shell reflected a metallic sheen that made the heart pound. Inhale, exhale. The cavern seemed to breathe with the creature. With each inhalation, the surrounding earth elements flowed toward it in a yellow-brown torrent and were swallowed. Each exhalation sent out a denser, heavier tide of elemental force, rippling the gravel underfoot. The air itself carried a pressure that made the soul recoil, an absolute suppression rooted in the hierarchy of life. Divine envoy, the goblin chieftain whispered. Gallywix and his elite guard stopped hundreds of meters from the thing, unable to step closer. The pressure bent their legs, made their teeth chatter. Several nearly collapsed where they stood. To them, the area ahead was not a battlefield, but a zone of divine punishment. Jason and his party, by contrast, were serenely composed. The soft glow of their amulets formed an invisible barrier that repelled the elemental tide. They walked forward as if through the courtyards of a school, unbothered by the fearful goblin stares, until they halted less than 30 meters from the monster. That calm disregard for the behemoth's presence was itself a miracle in the goblin's eyes. Jason stared at the black, mountain-like curve of carapace. 0. Deep scan. Construct a complete model. Command confirmed. Deep scan initiated. 3D structural model being constructed. Energy pulse analysis in progress. On Jason's retina, the world unmade and reassembled. The terrifying behemoth vanished, replaced by an astonishingly precise three-dimensional model of shimmering energy pathways and complex material structures. The creature ceased to be an unknowable horror and became an equation, a problem that could be measured, analyzed, and perhaps solved. 183. Ordinary iron and divine craftsmanship. Golden currents of energy flowed like surging rivers through the giant worm's body. Deep within its core, an earth element crystal, the size of a double-decker bus, pulsed like the heart of a sleeping deity, each beat sending out a tidal wave of power. Analysis report. Target energy exceeds containment capacity. 7 structural weak points, where energy circulation is obstructed, have naturally formed at various nodes. On the 3D model, 7 red markers pinpointed the creature's Achilles heels. Jason's vision pierced the thick rock walls to reveal the spiritual plants the chief prized. Roots of earthcore dragonshade and crystallized bloodvine, like ravenous parasites, were wedged into crevices around the worm, siphoning the stray energy leaking from its carapace seams and flourishing on it. All secrets lay bare beneath those divine eyes that perceived essence itself. Divine envoy. The chief's voice trembled from a distance, edged with desperate hope. How shall we confront this demon? Jason slowly withdrew his gaze. The data streams in his eyes faded back to normal. He turned to the goblins 100 meters away, fighters and technicians holding their breath, waiting for a divine command, and said something that shattered their expectations. Challenge? No, that's too inefficient. Then he scanned the cave like a meticulous craftsman surveying a workshop. His sight swept over the shattered remains of the Earth Tooth, rose to the massive glowing crystal clusters embedded in the cave's ceiling, as if sketching a design in his mind. Harry and Hermione exchanged looks. They knew Jason had another plan, something beyond brute force, something that could only be called art. At last, his gaze rested on the chief and the goblin technicians, puzzled and expectant. He smiled lightly, as if making a small request. I just need a few simple tools. Simple tools? Gallywix, the great chief engineer, blinked. He looked from the monstrous worm to Jason's calm face and could not reconcile the two. But in the presence of absolute power, questioning felt foolish. He swallowed and barked a command to the guards. I need materials, Jason continued. The chief hurried forward, thumping his chest. Name it. High-pressure steam pipes, super alloy drills. If Cogwheel City has it, I'll fetch it immediately. Jason shook his head. I need a few plates of your highest purity iron from the warehouse, some unpolished natural crystals, and several rolls of your finest copper wire. The chief went pale. Iron plates, crystals, copper wire. Those were basic industrial supplies. How could that be used against a petrified rockworm the size of a mountain? But under Jason's steady gaze, he swallowed his doubts and snarled urgent orders. Quick, with maximum efficiency, bring everything the divine envoy asks for, only the best. The goblins sprang into action. In less than 10 minutes, panting technicians carried in boxes and set them down with ceremony. Several iron plates that shone with a cold metallic brilliance, a pile of crystals of different sizes yet flawless clarity, and neat rolls of thin copper wire. Before the eyes of every goblin, and of Harry, Hermione, and Ron, Jason began his work. He extended his right hand, and arcane energy congealed into an invisible carving knife and a furnace. The scene that followed made mouths fall open. A heavy iron plate rose from the ground as if it had become weightless. It bent, stretched, and folded in midair like soft paper, forming a complex base with graceful curves. A roll of copper wire, unspooled and guided by an unseen force, stretched into golden filaments thinner than a hair. Those filaments writhed like living vines and wrapped themselves around a fist-sized rhomboid crystal, weaving intricate, precise energy circuits at a speed the eye could barely follow. The goblins were dumbfounded. As a people who worshipped machines and metallurgy, they understood the brute heat and force normally required to bend iron. This was beyond any technology they knew. It was divine workmanship. Ordinary iron was being elevated into art by a hand that seemed to shape reality itself. Jason's fingers traced the air, and arcane runes, glowing violet, materialized and imprinted themselves into the device's internal lattice. Energy shaping, rune engraving, microfield manipulation, each technique flowed into the next like movements in a practiced dance. Harry, Hermione, and Ron watched transfixed. They could recognize fragments of what Jason was doing from the Arcane Codex, but theory paled beside the reality before them. His movements were fluid and miraculous. Where they had seen only separate pieces of knowledge, Jason wove them into a coherent act of creation. They had expected a divine envoy to call down thunder or meteors to display world-shattering power. Instead, the creation of a precise instrument from raw, mundane materials was far more disorienting and, in a way, far more impressive. It recast him, not merely a god of destruction, but a god of creation. In just over 10 minutes, a small device, exquisitely constructed, floated into being. Palm-sized, with a curved base molded from the iron plate forming its body, a crystal ensconced at the center wrapped in golden threads, the whole piece gave off a faint, steady glow. The arcane runes within pulsed with a hidden beauty. The resonance resonator is complete, Jason said softly. The goblins exchanged doubtful looks. They stared from the delicate device to the mountain-sized petrified rockworm, openly unconvinced that such a toy could be the answer. Jason smiled slightly and let the resonator drift into his palm. He raised his hand and aimed the small instrument toward the petrified worm. 184. Resonance kill. Jason held the palm-sized, artfully crafted resonance harmonizer with a calm expression. Behind him, the Weasley twins, Fred and George, exchanged a look that asked the same question. Jason, Fred said, unable to hide his doubt, are you really going to use that little thing on that huge beast? George snorted. It looks less threatening than Ron's rat. Jason turned and gave his companions a brief lesson in the arcane arts, the two of them only just beginning to see what lay beyond simple charms. Everything has a natural frequency. Steel, the rocks beneath your feet, even that giant. If you find its frequency and hit it with a perfectly synchronized pulse, you can tear its structure apart from the inside without laying a finger on it. He bounced the harmonizer lightly in his hand. We call it physics. More specifically, a dimensionality reduction strike. Jason let a thin thread of magic bleed into the device. An ultra-high-frequency ripple, invisible to the eye, radiated from the harmonizer's core. A faint, insectile hum filled the air like a distant swarm of bees, and specks of dust on the ground began to vibrate in time. Then the cave answered with a soundless roar. At the far end, the petrified rockworm, the mountain-sized mass embedded in the rock, stirred. It was not rage but a cry of pain, a terrified keening. The beast's carapace trembled as though each cell were being tortured from within. It writhed against the stone that held it, helpless. The invisible resonance had locked every fiber of its body in place. Then hairline cracks spidered across the obsidian shell. 1, 2, 3, more and more, branching like living veins. In seconds, a dense network of fissures covered the exposed bulk of the creature. With a sound like the earth itself splitting, the petrified rockworm detonated inwardly. Its hardened shell, massive muscles, and giant bones shattered into primitive dust under the harmonizer's unseen pulse. The dust rose and drowned the light. The kill was finished in a silence that felt louder than any direct attack, a single absolute unraveling that spoke more of arcane mastery than brute force. When the dust finally began to fall, the mountain-sized beast was gone. Floating where it had been hung a colossal crystal, the size of a double-decker bus, glowing with a pure, raw light from the earth elemental plane. It pulsed like a heart and thrummed with terrible power. The petrified creature's life essence had crystallized, the heart of the giant, a treasure of the earth elemental plane. Silence held the cavern. The goblins, including great craftsman Chief Gallywix, stood stunned, minds blank. Then Gallywix reacted. He hurled his piston scepter aside and dropped to his knees with a heavy thud. In the oldest, most reverent goblin prostration, one once reserved only for the creator gods, he pressed his forehead to the cold rock and stayed there, shaking. "A miracle. This is a true miracle," he cried, his voice breaking. "The divine emissary has come. Long live the divine emissary." His shout lit a fuse. A chorus of frantic exclamations rose from the caverns. "A miracle! Long live the divine emissary!" Until the sound rolled like a tidal wave through the tunnels. The goblins, engineers, and craftsmen who had built their world on gears and steam and careful calculation had seen everything they knew annihilated by a quiet physics. Their reason and pride shattered. In their panic and awe, they reshaped their beliefs around the calm figure holding the harmonizer. Dust still hung golden in the glow of the heart. The cavern felt strained between deathly quiet and frenzied worship. The roar they had heard seemed to echo still, but only the crystal's pulse remained as proof of what had happened. The goblins pressed their foreheads to stone and chanted ancient slurred words: divine emissary, creator's work, earth walker, their voices hoarse and broken. For these practical, skeptical beings, the spectacle had undone every calculation and replaced it with superstition. A scraping sound finally broke the hum of voices. Gallywix crawled across the gravel, each movement trembling with fear and reverence. He did not look up until he reached Jason's feet, where he fell prostrate, forehead to the rock once more, abandoning every scrap of chieftainly dignity as he worshipped the stranger who had ended the giant and left its heart floating in the air. 185. After the miracle and the first believers. The goblin chief's mind was in chaos. His solid worldview had collapsed and been replaced by an abyss of awe. He raised his hands as if in surrender, palms presenting a universal gear key. Countless miniature cogs and brass components meshed together with impossible precision. This was the pinnacle of goblin engineering, the only credential that could activate the city's core furnace, unlock the deepest vaults, and mobilize their war machines. In that moment, he offered not just a key, but the fate and future of his people. Gallywix knelt before Jason, abandoned to fervent worship. Jason looked down at him, and through the mental link already established, fed a single idea into the goblin chief's mind. I found the resonance of its structure, and then used this small tool to sing the same tune. It broke itself. He neither called it magic nor claimed godhood. He used a scientific phrase the goblins could grasp in literal terms, but not in logic. An explanation that reduced an impossible miracle to a simple mechanism. To a race that measured everything with wrenches and steam valves, That reductive framing was more terrifying than any declaration of divinity. Pure divine power could have been shrugged off as some unknown force. But the notion that he had discerned the essence of a thing and erased it at the level of rules, something that made mountains fall apart by humming, negated everything a craftsman had ever believed about effort and mastery. It was a power only a creator could wield. Gallywix shuddered and bowed his forehead to the ground with dull thuds, as if the only way to vent the reverence swelling inside him was with this primitive self-abasement. Jason knew the moment had come. He accepted the goblin's allegiance and then issued his terms through the same mental channel. I need 3 things. The thought struck Gallywix like thunder. First, permanent and exclusive rights to mine this vein, the black gold and all spirit plants in it. Second, all your engineering data and authority over your technicians and craftsmen. Third, establish an outpost in Cogwheel City to send resources and labor to my divine kingdom. Each demand would be ruinous if refused, control from root to branch of goblin civilization. But Gallywix did not hesitate. He erupted into rapturous joy as if rescued. The gods did not demand sacrifices or doom. They offered service and purpose. To a pragmatic people, trading their skills for divine favor was the most economical bargain imaginable. Yes, great divine envoy, your will is the highest law of Cogwheel City, he cried, his voice bursting through the mental link. To cement that faith and to show he offered more than destruction, Jason turned to the wreckage of the Earth-Tooth mech a short distance away. He extended his hand, and arcane energy, like a living golden tide, flowed over twisted plates. Under the goblin's horrified, transfixed stares, broken steel, shattered gears, and torn pipes began to float, right themselves, and fuse back together. Everything moved in a perfect silent choreography. Jason traced shapes in the air, and arcs of purple light inscribed themselves like runes. He branded an energy amplification rune onto the mech's core furnace, increasing the conversion efficiency of crude steam into cleaner, denser power. He carved a material penetration rune into the giant alloy drill bit, making the air at its cutting face warp subtly as it turned. When the last rune completed, the refurbished Earth-Tooth descended and settled with a dull thud. Its appearance remained raw and violent in goblin taste, but every line suggested calculated precision, every surface bristled with promise. The faint pulse of the runes winked between seams, as if a true soul had been given to cold metal. At Gallywix's command, a trembling goblin clambered into the new cockpit like a pilgrim. He activated the mech. A roar, purer, deeper, and more condensed than anything the cavern had ever heard, shook the tunnels. For a moment, all the goblins stopped breathing. They stared first at the resurrected Earth-Tooth and then at the unruffled figure who had made it whole, and every remaining scrap of doubt evaporated into religious fervor. They understood that following this divine envoy would bring protection and a leap forward for their technological pride. Conquest, in that instant, transfigured into guidance. Gallywix, trembling and devout, signed the pact on behalf of his race. The contract was no paper but a curtain of light Jason drew in the air with his fingertips. When Gallywix pressed his hand to it, the light sank into his palm and seared into his soul, a binding that could not be broken. From that moment, the goblins became the first subordinate civilization of the floating city. Jason left behind several automated exploration puppets, sleek sci-fi devices controlled by Zero. They immediately began detailed mapping and mining plans for the vein, their speed and precision prompting fresh astonishment from the goblins. Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched, seeing with their own eyes how Jason had subdued an entire intelligent people with a single unique approach. Their understanding of power shifted again. They thought of Lord Voldemort, raw force that brought only fear and subjugation, and compared him to Jason, who offered guidance, creation, and mutual gain. This, they realized, was a different caliber of power. "Let's go," Jason said, leading his satisfied team toward the giant's heart, which floated in the cavern like an underground sun. "It's time to return. Our city is waiting for the nourishment we bring." 186. Gift from the God of Craftsmen. With the light, disorienting pull typical of spatial jumps, Jason and his group slipped through the silver-blue portal and returned to the central hall of the floating city. Underfoot, the ground was solid and steady, and the air here smelled of pure energy, clean and sharp, nothing like the underground world's mix of dirt, sulfur, and metal. Aside from the giant's heart still hovering in midair like an underground sun, they had also brought back the absolute allegiance of a sentient people. No sooner had their boots touched the floor than space tore open again across the hall. A temporary portal, rimmed in brassy light and hissing faint plumes of steam, was pried open. Beyond it, the goblins crowded, faces alight with zeal. Divine envoy, the first batch of tributes, no, the first supplies for the divine kingdom, are ready. Chief Artificer Galliwix's voice echoed in Jason's mind over the mental link, humble and urgent, as if a single second's delay might invite divine punishment. One by one, crude mining carts driven by gears and chains were shoved through the portal. Merlin's beard, Ron blurted, eyes bulging as he stared at the piled goods on the first cart. It held blocks of high-purity black gold ore, each piece as smooth as obsidian but holding the twinkle of stars within, humming with dense, weighty energy. At Hogwarts, even a fingernail-sized sliver would send any alchemist into rapture. Here they were piled like common coal. More carts followed, full of brightly colored crystals, sharp facets, flawless interiors, their magic warping the air around them. But Harry and Hermione were fixed on the last carts. They carried two different, extraordinary plants. One had gnarled, purplish-black roots, like curled, sleeping dragons, patterned naturally across its surface. This was the legendary, thought-extinct, Earthcore dragonshade, its roots pulsing with a faint inner light. The other was stranger still, translucent vines that looked carved from crystal, within which a red liquid flowed like fresh blood. Crystallized blood vine, only whispered about in the Arcane Codex, its mix of earth element and life energy so intense it was almost tangible. The goblins had been astonishingly efficient. In mere hours after Jason subdued them, the most valuable resources were already mined and transported. The floating city's central warehouse, which had once felt sparse, filled visibly fast. Their reserves surged into the unexpected. Unbelievable, Hermione breathed, quill hovering over her thick notebook, unsure where to start. The power of a civilization, Jason. You've done far more than conquest. Jason's smile was quiet as it swept over the treasures and rested on the one person who'd been silent, but whose eyes burned with hunger. Professor Snape, he said, I think these earthborn treasures should go to the most qualified hands. Snape's calm mask slipped for a heartbeat. From the first glimpse of dragon shade and crystallized bloodvine, something had stirred in him. As a potion master, he understood their worth like no one else. Show me. Jason led Snape to a new wing of the floating city. A door of light slid aside and revealed a laboratory that stole the breath, a potion lab of epic scale. A dome simulated a starry sky, bathing the room in steady, soft light. The floor was laid with a single unknown white crystal, mirror-smooth and spotless. Hundreds of cauldrons, distillers, and crystal vessels stood in orderly ranks, each kept pristine by a hum of arcane energy. What tightened Snape's pupils most were the assistants moving among them. Dozens of alchemy golems, half a meter tall, with 6 flexible mechanical arms capable of cutting, grinding, extracting, and precisely controlling temperatures all at once. Their steadiness and accuracy far outmatched any mortal hand. This place, along with every instrument and assistant, is yours, Jason said, his voice seeming to come from the vault of the dome. One request. Make the most of these materials. Snape walked into the lab like a pilgrim entering a temple. He approached the energy field, cradling the crystallized bloodvine, and extended his pale, long-fingered hands. He stroked the translucent vines and felt the raw, immense life energy within. For the first time without warning, infatuation flickered across his icy face. Perfect. A true laboratory, he murmured, like a man addressing a lover. In the arcane world Jason had shown him, Severus Snape would not be a mere professor concocting potions in a dungeon. He would be a pioneer of life and elemental mysteries. He waved a hand toward Jason without looking back, a dismissal as casual as shooing a fly. Go. Do not disturb me. Then he dove in, issuing complex, precise instructions to the alchemy golems, and the lab sprang to life like a well-oiled engine. Seeing Snape find his calling, Jason allowed himself a pleased smile and led Harry, Ron, and Hermione to the floating city's power core room. Now it's our turn. He indicated the goblins' high-purity alloys and energy crystals. The floating city has a powerful soul now, but its bones and flesh are still fragile. Today, we give it its first reinforcement. He held a piece of black gold ore. Arcane flames flared in his palm as he refined it into molten metal. Hermione, calculate the rune nodes and energy circuits that must be reinforced once we integrate this alloy into the core. Harry, use your perception to guide this molten alloy, spreading it evenly across the core's framework. Ron, Jason said, looking at the flustered boy, your job is crucial. Watch the energy shield readings. If structural pressure fluctuates by more than 5%, tell me at once. Be our safety valve. They moved as one. Complex light screens unfurled before Hermione and streams of data flowed. She bent over them, calculations blazing through her mind with laser focus. Harry inhaled and sent out invisible tendrils of magic to steer the molten metal. Ron stared at the shield monitoring interface, sweat beating at his temples. Under Jason's command, their strengths synchronized perfectly. The goblin alloy wove into the floating city's pure energy base. Energy crystals were slotted into key nodes as new relays. When the last shard of alloy merged with the core, the power room trembled. The core's glow shifted, its pristine white light deepening into a thick, noble, dark gold. Energy surged like a tsunami through the city. Power readings rocketed. Energy core output power increased by 50, 100%, 105%, stabilizing at 200%. Zero announced in its cold, mechanical prompt. Outside, a more spectacular change unfolded. Above the translucent arcane shield, hexagonal plates of solid armor, hued with earthy yellow light, began to coalesce and interlock. Fashioned from goblin alloy and etched with arcane runes Jason had designed, they offered defense, deflection, and energy absorption. Within minutes, a thick shell of armor covered the entire floating city. What had been an energy skeleton now took on flesh and bone. At the same time, a jubilant laugh rang from Snape's lab. Snape held a crystal vial high. Inside, a viscous, lava-like potion shimmered darkly, a tiny golden mote pulsing like a heart at its center. "It's a success! I succeeded!" he breathed, eyes alight with a satisfaction he'd never felt before. With Earthcore Dragonshade as the base, crystallized Bloodvine as the catalyst, and this arcane extraction method, this bottle of Pan Shi's blood, its potency surpasses anything I've done. Soon each team member received a small sample of Snape's new potion. Hermione found her elemental affinity and mental resilience sharpened after a single drop. Previously obscure arcane runes seemed suddenly clearer. Jason stood in the renovated control center, watching the armored shell through the window, then looking at his companions whose strength and resolve were rising fast. "As of today, our beginner protection period ends," he said, steady and commanding. "We have a stable logistics base and endless resources. It's time to return to the world we know and settle some old scores." His gaze grew distant and resolute, as if looking through space toward the magical world. "And by the way, recruit the first batch of real residents, workers, for our city." 187. Invitation from the Ministry of Magic. As summer drew to a close, Hogwarts Castle was bathed in the warm gold of the setting sun. In the headmaster's office, a shimmering silver-blue portal opened with a steady ripple. Jason stepped out first, followed by Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Snape. After a month apart, all of them had changed. Harry's eyes were steady and resolute, no longer clouded by past confusion. Ron's steps were measured, his impulsiveness tempered, and Hermione's gaze glittered with knowledge and newfound confidence, as if arcane sparks might fly from her at any moment. Their practical experience and advanced knowledge gave them a faintly detached air, almost at odds with the ancient, tranquil surroundings. "Ah, welcome back, children." Dumbledore stood waiting in his office. His face held that familiar gentle smile, but the usual brightness in his cerulean eyes had given way to a more serious gravity. "It seems your summer practicals were most productive." He looked them over, his gaze lingering on Jason a fraction longer before he nodded. Before anyone could begin to share tales of the underground world, Dumbledore waved his wand. The office's doors and windows sealed instantly, warded against prying eyes. His smile faded, his expression grew solemn. "I'm afraid we must postpone any celebration," he said, picking up a thick parchment sealed with the ministry's wax from his desk. "This arrived an hour before you returned." Meanwhile, in London at the Ministry of Magic, the atmosphere in Minister Cornelius Fudge's office was so oppressive You could almost wring water from it. Fudge paced anxiously, his green bowler hat tossed on the sofa, his tie crooked. He gripped a copy of the Daily Prophet. The headline on the front page jabbed at his temples like needles. Hogwarts heroes achieve new feats. Mysterious heir revealed as Tom Riddle. Millennial basilisk vanquished. The story had spread across the British wizarding world in recent days. The public celebrated, praising Dumbledore and the brave students, but Fudge felt nothing but cold dread. From start to finish, the Ministry had been completely excluded from the affair. No Aurors had been deployed, no official investigation conducted. The only post-event report came as a brief summary sent by Owl from Dumbledore. What did that mean? It meant there was a power at Hogwarts operating independently of the Ministry, powerful enough to resolve a millennium-old secret. The leaders of that power were Dumbledore, the man he had long distrusted, and a student named Jason, whose background was obscure. Power rests on control. Power that cannot be controlled is the greatest threat to power. You needn't worry so much, Minister. Dolores Umbridge sat primly on the sofa in a pink suit, her false smile perfectly in place, a teacup in hand. She blew gently on her tea, regarded Fudge with her small, sharp eyes, and spoke slowly. The stronger Dumbledore appears, the more it highlights the Ministry's role in maintaining order. As for this Jason, his arrival gives us an opportunity not to be missed. Opportunity? Fudge stopped pacing and stared at her. Of course. Umbridge's smile sweetened, but her words carried venom. We cannot allow powerful forces operating outside the Ministry's oversight to grow unchecked. That would breed chaos and undermine the Ministry's authority. For the safety and order of the wizarding world, she said, emphasizing the words, we must guide and regulate them. She set down her teacup, leaned in, and lowered her voice. We can convene a special Wizengamot hearing. Ostensibly, it would be to commend these heroes and to award them the Order of Merlin. But at the hearing, we can invite Mr. Jason to demonstrate his miraculous meditation technique that strengthens ordinary students and to explain his so-called floating city. Innovations of that scale should rightly be managed by the Ministry. Think of the public good. Fudge's eyes brightened. Umbridge's suggestion was the key that unlocked his basest ambitions. That's it. The commendation is a pretext. The interrogation is the real intent. Under the guise of virtue, they could pressure Jason. If he could obtain the meditation method and control of the floating city, wouldn't that uncontrollable power become the sharpest weapon in his hands? Back at Hogwarts, Dumbledore handed the sealed invitation to Jason. The letter was ornate and flattering, praising the Hogwarts heroes, and announcing that the Ministry intended to hold a highest-level investiture ceremony for Harry, Ron, Hermione, and especially Jason. It politely invited Jason to share his insights on magical innovation and future development before the entire Wizengamot. The letter, like a vulture in peacock feathers, betrayed its true aim, to force Jason to hand over the meditation technique and give the Ministry authority over the floating city. They had even caught wind of the floating city through their channels, though their information was vague. Ron and Hermione bristled. Harry's face darkened. The calm before the storm. The Ministry, ancient, calcified, ravenous, had finally reached out its greedy tentacles. Surprisingly, Jason showed no anger or solemnity as he read the invitation. He set it down casually and looked at Dumbledore. With his current strength, he seemed to feel, even if the entire wizarding world rose against him, they could not prevail. His tone was light. They don't want to talk, he said with a short laugh. They want to slice up the cake. Very well, Dumbledore replied. Let them see whether they can bite into it. Jason's calm, confident air instantly dissolved the tension in the office. Dumbledore regarded the young man, so composed and mature beyond his years, with unmistakable approval. And what do you intend to do? Of course we'll go, Jason said. We must attend. If we don't, they'll have grounds to brand us dangerous elements outside the Ministry's supervision. He walked to the window and looked out over the tranquil campus, though his gaze seemed to reach all the way to the centers of power in London. Besides, I want to see the kind of people who run the wizarding world today. Before they left for the Ministry, Jason issued a quiet command into the air. 0. I am here, Commander, came the reply. Immediately gather all data on Minister Cornelius Fudge, Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge, and key Wizengamot members through every available intelligence channel and by scanning with rule runes. I want political scandals, family ties, financial status, and a personality weakness analysis. Directive confirmed. Data acquisition, integration, and analysis are underway. Estimated completion, 3 minutes. Jason turned to the others with a confident smile. He never went into a fight unprepared. This time, he was no longer a reactive, dragon-slaying youth. He was armed with modern intelligence and absolute backing, ready to take the center stage in the British wizarding world and see what would happen when those powers came calling. 188. Wizengamot Farce, London, Britain, the Ministry of Magic. Afternoon sunlight poured through the minister's office floor-to-ceiling windows, speckling the carpet with light and making dust motes hang visible in the air. The room seemed utterly still. Inside, however, the mood was anything but calm. Dumbledore! It's Dumbledore again! Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, paced the room with restless energy. His trademark green bowler sat tossed on the sofa, his tie was crooked, and the hem of his expensive robe swept the floor with each step. The front page of the Daily Prophet, all about him, all about Hogwarts, as if the ministry no longer exists. He flailed his hands in agitation. And that boy, Jason, a student, he dared to flout the ministry and caused such an uproar at Hogwarts. This is an open challenge to our authority. Opposite him, Dolores Umbridge, in a pink wool suit, stirred her tea with slow, deliberate movements. A sickly sweet smile was fixed on her face. Behind it, her small, sharp eyes shone with cold calculation. "Minister, there is no cause for alarm," she said in a syrupy tone. "Your wisdom far surpasses Dumbledore's. Wasn't that invitation letter proof of your foresight?" Fudge paused, the lines of worry on his brow easing. He had the letter already sent to Hogwarts, a carefully laid trap. He pictured the upcoming hearing in the solemn Wizengamot, Dumbledore and that mysterious student under questioning from him and the counselors. They would ask Jason to reveal his miraculous meditation for the good of the magical community and to hand over the fabled floating city. That would be his moment, his triumph. He would eclipse Dumbledore and seize irresistible authority for himself. "Yes, Dolores, you're right." Confidence returned. He moved to the window, arms folded, watching witches and wizards move through the ministry courtyard below and savoring the taste of power. Order must rest with the ministry. Any power beyond our control must be regulated, guided, or removed. Umbridge's smile widened. She was about to flatter him further when something happened. The crystal chandelier, which glowed softly by enchantment, flickered once. Its light dimmed as if its energy had been cut. An indescribable pressure dropped into the room, vast, impersonal, instinctively soul-shaking. It felt as if an invisible behemoth had descended nearby, its sheer mass warping the air. "What's that? A power failure?" Fudge murmured, stunned. Umbridge's smile froze. She felt this was no ordinary magical glitch. Outside, the clear sky changed in a way no weather could explain. It wasn't simply darkening. Something far larger was blotting out the sun. "Look, up there! What is that?" came a scream from the ministry courtyard, sharp and panicked. Fudge and Umbridge rushed to the window and saw a sight that wiped the floor with their plans and pride. The clouds above the ministry were torn apart by a gigantic, whirling gap. Golden sunlight streamed through the center, lighting up faces turned toward the sky. From that opening, a floating city, vast beyond words, drifted free, its shadow falling over half of London and hanging over the British Ministry of Magic like a dark omen. Its base combined heavy metal that gleamed dark gold with an unfamiliar black rock. Hexagonal armor plates, glowing with an earthy yellow light, clad the walls. Complex arcane runes were carved into them, visible to the naked eye, their patterns flowing like breath. Above, towers and halls rose in architectural styles unlike anything wizards knew, with an air of future and fantasy. Bands of energy, some ethereal blue, others burnished gold, threaded between structures, outlining the silhouette of the creation. It simply hovered there, and its presence spoke louder than any proclamation. A majesty that felt miraculous and a cold, technological precision pressed on every observer. Silence fell like a weight. In the courtyard, witches and wizards froze in place, heads tipped back, mouths open, eyes glassy. Papers fluttered to the ground, quills slipped from fingers, forgotten. Some reached for their wands, only to find their hands shaking too violently to grip them. Even the aurors, veterans who prided themselves on readiness, were stunned into dumbness. The pride and menace that usually sat on their faces vanished, replaced by raw disbelief. In Fudge's office, the silence became a kind of deathly stillness. No, no, impossible, he choked, lips trembling, skin drained of color. His grand hearing, his bureaucratic certainty, the authority he had pictured, they all now seemed infantile before the city above him. He had dreamed of bringing the floating city under his control. Instead, it had arrived, parked insolently over the very heart of his power, reminding him who truly held sway. Umbridge's painted smile had curdled into horror. Her teacup hit the carpet, the bone china shattering as hot tea splashed across her lap. She barely registered it, emitting a thin, involuntary clucking noise and staring unblinking out at the sky. Humiliation sat heavy on them both. No envoy had come. No warning had been issued. Not a shred of attention had been paid to their carefully worded invitation. The city had simply arrived, and by casting its shadow, told them in the plainest terms who was master now. The floating city of dawn hung motionless, declaring that an old era was over and a new one had begun. Across London, communication networks faltered as the sky changed. Owls circled wildly but dared not land. The Flu network flames danced and sputtered, green tongues flickering as they were swamped by instantaneous, overwhelming traffic. News, part panic, part wonder, part worship, spread through the magical world at a speed that made orderly response impossible. At Malfoy Manor, Lucius Malfoy sat in his study among dark artifacts, polishing his snake-headed cane with practiced, unhurried strokes. Midway through a motion, he stopped. A message, not in words, but through the arcane contracts woven into his blood and soul, pulsed into his mind. The curtain was about to rise. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of the new presence that now wrapped the British Isles. There was no fear in his cold gray eyes. Instead, ambition and a fanatic hunger burned brighter. He straightened his black silk robes with careful fingers, smoothed the cuffs, and tightened his grip on the chilled metal of his cane. "The stage is set," he said to the empty room, voice low and almost operatic, "and my part is finally about to begin." 189. Pioneer White Paper. The Order of a New Era. On the second day after the City of Dawn appeared above London, the entire British wizarding world was wrapped in a strange atmosphere, part panic, part morbid fervor. The steel divine city hovering overhead was like an indifferent giant eye, watching the small, convulsing world below. It made no further moves, but its mere presence was the most devastating blow to the old order. The Ministry of Magic proved helpless. Flooded with howlers and faced with a public surge that threatened to overwhelm its entrance, Fudge and his officials finally understood how powerless they were. They could offer no explanations because they had none to give. They were as terrified and uncertain as everyone else. Under the immense shadow of the floating city, their authority melted away, utterly discredited. The Daily Prophet's front page reflected the chaos. Multiple competing, sensational headlines tried to make sense of the impossible. Doomsday above London, the steel behemoth. Muggle superweapon, ministry helpless. Ancient god awakes, does Hogwarts know? Every conjecture pointed to disorder and the unknown, fueling the public's panic. At the heart of that storm came a name nobody expected. On Diagon Alley, before the white steps of Gringotts, thousands of witches and wizards had gathered, craning their necks at the distant silhouette of the floating city. They whispered rumors and theories, wide-eyed with fear, awe, and curiosity. Then the crowd stirred. A doorway of pure light opened silently at the top of the Gringotts steps, and Lucius Malfoy stepped through. He wore his tailored black silk robes and carried his trademark snake-headed cane, but his bearing had changed. He no longer appeared as the scheming noble who had moved in powerful circles. Now he stood tall and straight, his chin leveled, and his gray eyes, stripped of their usual calculating glint, held an almost divine indifference, an air of looking down on the world. He had come to receive homage on behalf of his master, Jason. "Malfoy, why is he here?" someone murmured. "The ministry can't even speak. What's he going to do?" "He doesn't look afraid at all." Under 1,000 surprised, suspicious, and curious gazes, Lucius walked to the center of the steps. He didn't need a sonorous charm. His voice, clear and commanding, carried to every ear. "I know you are confused," he said, sweeping his gaze over the crowd. "You are afraid. You are lost. You are searching for an answer. Today, I, Lucius Malfoy, as the City of Dawn's authorized terrestrial representative, will give you that answer." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. "City of Dawn? Representative? Lucius Malfoy." Reporters surged forward, but Lucius tapped his cane once. An invisible barrier snapped outward, holding everyone back within 10 meters and returning the scene to an eerie silence. He did not bother to explain the origins of the floating city. Mortals need not be given the reasons of gods. From his robe, he produced a scroll, unlike any ordinary parchment. It flowed like moonlight, its ends capped with dark gold metal shafts. As he unrolled it, rows of ancient arcane runes composed of pure energy lit up across its surface, sending a thrilling magical tremor through the air. The object was beautiful as art and sinister as a binding. What it really was, Lucius explained, was a servitude contract prepared by Jason. "The world you know is stagnant," Lucius intoned, his voice seductive and inciting. "For centuries you have clung to the magic your ancestors left you, bound by bloodlines and rigid class. Your power is shackled by talent and family glory. You yearn for more, but there is no path forward." His words struck the crowd like a hammer, especially those of modest birth or stalled careers in the lower ranks of the ministry, the ones whose strength had stagnated. Resentment and longing flashed in their eyes. "And now the City of Dawn offers a choice." He raised the scroll. A title shone along its length, the Pioneer White Paper. "This is a contract, a key to an entirely new world. Any adult witch or wizard may voluntarily sign this Pioneer contract." He dropped the first bombshell. Signatories will immediately receive, free of charge, a basic arcane system. The traditional magic you know is but a flickering candle compared to the boundless otherworlds. Only Arcane is the true flame that will light the stars of the new era. A collective gasp rose, a free inheritance of a whole new power system. This was unheard of. "Pioneering involves risk, yes," Lucius conceded, "but it also brings reward. Your mission will be to explore endless otherworlds and bring back resources unique to those realms for the City of Dawn. We do not require your galleons. Such coinage is meaningless to us. Every otherworld resource you submit will be converted into contribution points. And contribution points will be the hard currency of the new era. You may exchange them for anything you desire." He pointed to the end of the white paper where a list had been inscribed in brilliant runes. "Want to break through a magic growth bottleneck? Mid to high-level affinity potions will renew your power. Lacking in talent? Mental tempering techniques will smooth and strengthen your spellcasting. Want to touch the legendary realms?" His voice rose to a thunderous peak. "First-order advancement runes. Enough to smash your mortal shackles and elevate your life to a new dimension, to become true first-order arcanists, with lifespans and powers beyond ordinary mortals." This was not a secret ploy. It was an open, irresistible offer. It laid out a ladder to power aimed straight at every wizard's deepest wounds, talent ceilings, and family limitations. Faced with the temptation of absolute advancement, risks and unknowns suddenly seemed trivial. The press conference was over. Lucius answered no questions. He turned, walked back through the doorway of light, and vanished, leaving the Pioneer white paper suspended in midair like a fatal temptation and an enchanted automaton to handle registrations. After a moment of stunned silence, Diagon Alley, and then the entire British wizarding community, erupted. "Is that real? Breaking talent limits? I'm signing. I'm tired of being a clerk in the ministry's records office. I want to go to other worlds." "It's a trap, a dark arts contract. So what if it is? If it can break my bottleneck, I'll sell my soul, and this looks better than any devil's contract." Countless witches and wizards went wild with hope and fanaticism, seeing in the City of Dawn the dawn of a new era. Under its shadow, the old world order crumbled. Lucius Malfoy's status transformed overnight, from a disgraced former Death Eater reviled by many to the terrestrial face of a powerful new order. The tide of public opinion surged, and soon ordinary wizards eager to change their fates would cast their votes for the future with their own signatures and actions. 190. The Tide of Time. Crazy wizards. Lucius Malfoy's press conference hit like a nuclear bomb dropped into a still lake, By the next day, the ripples had become a continent-spanning tidal wave. Britain, and in fact, the whole European magical world, was swept into panic and frenzy. In an unprecedented move, the Daily Prophet set aside its usual sensational pieces and editorials and printed the Trailblazer white paper in full across 4 pages. The headline was blunt and incendiary. The Genesis contract of a new era. Your future, immortality, power, you decide. Before dawn had properly broken in Diagon Alley, before the owls had finished their deliveries, hundreds of thousands of hands reached for the papers. Galleons and sickles poured into moneybags. Newspapers were snatched up in an instant. Those who missed out rushed to the offices, some willing to pay 10 times the cover price to secure a copy. An unprecedented reading frenzy gripped the magical world. In a secluded lounge at Auror headquarters, London, an old Auror named Elmer held the paper with hands scarred and calloused. Once one of Mad-Eye Moody's most capable partners, he had been relegated for years to organizing dusty files after his magic waned and old injuries took their toll. He hadn't felt his magic grow in 30 years, an erosion slower and more bitter than death. His eyes fixed on the line about the first-tier promotion rune, and the cloudy pupils filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of a hope long suppressed and nearly forgotten, now rekindled. "Can I still go further?" he murmured. In a damp, rented room in Nocturne Alley, a pale-faced young wizard with wolfish eyes devoured every word. A half-blood with talent and ambition, but no connections or galleons, he lived at the bottom of the magical world. What gripped him in the white paper wasn't the potions or runes so coveted by others, but the cold, impartial contribution point system. Submit resources, earn contributions. Bloodline, connections, and wealth, the old era's chains, would be rendered meaningless. If he worked hard and dared, he could forge his own future. "My time has come," he whispered, clenching his fists until his knuckles whitened. Meanwhile, in a polished, pure-blood manner, a young scion tossed the paper onto a velvet sofa and yawned. The promotion materials that sent lower-class wizards into ecstasy bored him. Exploring other worlds? That sounds much more interesting than balls and Quidditch, he drawled to the house elf at his side. "Prepare my best adventure gear. I'm signing up." Against the sweep of this new tide, the old powers looked pale and impotent. In the Minister for Magic's office, Cornelius Fudge bellowed at a letter of condemnation he had drafted. "Recruiting wizards for dangerous interdimensional exploration without ministry authorization is wildly irresponsible. It tramples our established magical order. Close every illegal signing point at once. Arrest the ringleader, Lucius Malfoy." His roar echoed in the empty office, answered only by the distant, rising roar of voices outside. Requests for details about the Trailblazer initiative flooded in through the Flu network from foreign ministries of magic. No one paid heed to Fudge's fury. Faced with the tide of the era, his words couldn't even make a ripple. Dolores Umbridge sat nearby, pale. She knew the game was lost. When the City of Dawn stopped being a threat and became a temptation no one could refuse, the ministry's authority collapsed. The signing frenzy exceeded everyone's worst expectations. The Malfoys had set up the signing point at the foot of Gringotts steps. Wizards from across Britain surrounded it, blocking passage. The queue stretched from Diagon Alley to the Leaky Cauldron and even spilled into Muggle Charing Cross Road, a scene that rivaled the wildest Black Friday in the Muggle world. Futuristic-looking alchemical golems replaced the ministry's slow clerks. Their mechanical eyes scanned each applicant's magic level and physical condition with startling efficiency. Wizards from France, Germany, and even more distant lands arrived by illegal portkeys and apparition, risking everything for a chance at the dawn of a new era. Amid the frenzy, hesitation lingered. This was the first attempt. Who could say there wasn't a hidden trap in that arcane contract? Then the crowd parted automatically, making a path. A stooped old man leaning on a cane walked to the signing point beneath 100 curious stares. "It's Mr. Elphius Doge." "Oh, chief advisor to the Wesengamot, Dumbledore's old friend. What is he going to do?" Elphius Doge, a venerated figure long thought too old for further progress, became the center of attention. He approached the registration golem, his lined eyes sweeping the crowd, and spoke in a steady voice. "My old friend Albus pursued progress and light his whole life. I have been stuck in this stagnant mire for 50 years. He dropped his cane and straightened his already bent shoulders. Today, I choose a new path. He placed his hand on the glowing trailblazer white paper. A soft pillar of golden light descended and wrapped him. Countless arcane runes, like swimming fish, sank into his skin. For a moment, his eyes blazed with a brilliance they hadn't shown in decades, as if infinite knowledge and power were being built in his mind. Then his steadied hand made a grasping motion into empty air. A missile of deep blue arcane energy formed in his palm and streaked upward with a piercing shriek. Boom! The projectile detonated 1,000 meters above the city in an explosion of dazzling, crystalline light. The magical surge it released was more intense and purer than any spell from the greatest wizards. Reporters' crystal balls relayed the spectacle live to every corner of the magical world. If Doge's signing was an endorsement from the old guard, the arcane missile was the irresistible proof. Doubt shattered. The crowd's last restraint snapped. Sign! Everyone sign! I want that power! The crowd erupted. Demonstration had turned suspicion into madness. Only the raw hunger for power remained. Wizards surged forward, and for a tense moment, the scene nearly spun out of control. In the City of Dawn's central control room, a huge screen displayed the chaos in Diagon Alley. The first 500 trailblazers who had passed screening were already teleported to the floating city's gathering point. Veterans like Elmer, ambitious rookies from Nocturne Alley, and thrill-seeking noble scions. They stared up in shock as a glowing portal to an unknown plane opened before them, revealing an initial world of pure energy and unfamiliar but safe resources. On another screen in front of Jason, the numerical readout of the floating city's resource reserves began to tick upward after he dispatched the first batch of trailblazers. The frenzied wizards, whose desires he'd lit, would become his sharpest scythes, harvesting vast resources from endless dimensional planes. Jason knew that the contributions needed for his promotion to the third tier and beyond were already beginning to flow in. 191. Harvest season and Voice of the World weeks had passed since the Trailblazer white paper was released, and the British wizarding world had been plunged into unprecedented turmoil and division. Some conservative pureblood families publicly denounced Malfoy in the newspapers as a traitor to their age, a devil tempting wizards into an unknown abyss. The Ministry of Magic, like an ostrich burying its head in the sand, offered no effective countermeasures beyond tired speeches about order and tradition. But the tide of history does not pause for the cries of the stubborn. More often it was the ordinary wizards, those whose talent and background had constrained them for so long, who voted with their feet for this new era. Every day, hundreds of wizards crowded Diagon Alley to sign their names beneath the fatally alluring Trailblazer white paper. They abandoned steady but underpaid ministry jobs, left familiar but unchanging lives behind, accepted the basic arcane inheritance that rewrote their understanding, and stepped into the teleportation gates to other worlds. Today was harvest season. City of Dawn, Central Exchange Hall. The first batch of trailblazers who had completed their missions returned through the gate, scarred and dust-caked. Their robes were stained with the blood of unknown beasts and the sap of alien plants. Their eyes were tired, but in each one there burned a flame of excitement, lingering fear, and fanatic conviction. They brought back mountains of alien ore, strange plants, and energy crystals the magical world had never seen. Next, Barnaby, a middle-aged wizard who had once been a minor clerk in the ministry's document processing department, had long dreamed of affording a bottle of mana amplification potion to loosen the magic that had stagnated within him for years. He dumped a whole sack of faintly blue ore, pulsing like a heartbeat, onto the evaluation platform tended by an alchemical golem. Glowheart ore, medium purity, contains dual energies, shadow and spirit, estimated value 874 contribution points. The golem's cold, electronic voice made Barnaby's chest tighten. He didn't hesitate. He rushed to the exchange counter on the other side and pointed at a potion floating in an energy field, its contents glimmering softly. I want that one. Intermediate mana amplification potion. Exchange successful. 800 contribution points deducted. Barnaby snatched up the potion. Under 100 envious, hopeful eyes, he uncorked it on the spot and swallowed the warm liquid in one desperate gulp. Immediately, a fierce surge of energy detonated inside him. Ah! A roar of pain and ecstasy split the hall as a visible wave of magic rolled outward from him. The stagnant power within Barnaby, fed and fanned, surged against the invisible barrier that had choked him for a year. Crack! A sound like something breaking at the soul level rang out. Barnaby stood frozen, tears cutting clean tracks through the wrinkles in his cheeks as rivers of magic flooded through him. He had broken through, the year-long bottleneck shattered in an instant. The exchange hall, already electric, ignited like kindling. Trailblazers stared at the exchange lists with feverish eyes. Galleons and old money lost their status. Contribution points became the hard currency of the new world. In the central resource repository of the floating city, Jason, Harry, Hermione, and Ron stood amid an unimaginable warehouse of alien materials. Ores glowed in prismatic heaps, vines heavy with life were cultivated into groves, and stacks of energy crystals gave off enough light to turn the space into something like a temple. The sheer mass of resources made the air hum. Reporting, Commander. The voice of Zero, the tower spirit, echoed through the cavernous hall. The Trailblazer system has been active for 3 weeks. The resource repository has reached 1,200% capacity. The city's total energy reserve now exceeds the critical threshold for supporting your advancement to Tier 3 Arcanist by a factor of 50. 50 times. Hermione's breath hitched. She understood what that meant. With energy support like that, the chance of failure was vanishingly small. Jason nodded slowly, looking at the companions who had grown with him. A light of calm certainty shone in his eyes. We succeeded. His voice was steady and carried an unspoken reassurance. This city has a heart and flowing blood. Now it's my turn. He drew a deep breath. I will go into seclusion to attempt advancement to Tier 3 Arcanist. That is the boundary between mortals and demigods, a true leap in the scale of life. During my seclusion, the floating city will be entrusted to your management. Hermione, the city's brain is yours. Harry, Ron, you're in charge of dispatch and the safety of the Trailblazer teams. Professor Snape's potion production must not stop. Having given his orders, Jason fell silent. He walked to the deepest part of the repository, where an energy door slid open without sound. Beyond it lay the city's most advanced meditation chamber, linked directly to the main energy pool. As Jason vanished inside, the floating city seemed to awake like a great beast. Lights outside the core dimmed. Visible streams of energy, bands of golden and blue light, flowed from every quarter toward the heart. Above the city, the sky, once clear, began to darken. A vast energy vortex, large enough to blot out the sun, formed and turned with a silent, terrible grace. It stirred the clouds, and the pressure it threw off made the entire magical London tremble. An advancement that would shake the age was about to begin. The path to becoming something beyond mortal was already being laid underfoot. 192, the pulse of the floating city, new trade routes, and the green of life. The success of the Pioneer program brought not only mountains of resources from other worlds to the floating city, but also an intangible asset, popularity. The first group of returning pioneers, bodies covered in scars and hands full of spoils from otherworldly battles, regarded this once empty cold steel city as their only safe haven and resting base. Here they exchanged intelligence, displayed their gains, and licked their wounds, which gave rise to the most basic commercial needs. A scarred wizard desperately needed a bottle of powerful healing potion. Someone lucky who had acquired strange ores wanted a place to forge them into a usable weapon, and many, after surviving the bloodshed of another world, simply wanted somewhere to drink, buy a silly novelty, and relax. Demand is the catalyst of civilization, and Jason keenly sensed the trend quietly gathering. He stood before the light screen in the central control room, watching pioneers in 2s and 3s barter on the ground in the lower living area. Zero, he said, issue an announcement. Command confirmed, Commander. The floating city of Dawn, living area by the lower industrial zone, is officially open for shop rentals. All pioneers may rent shops according to their contribution points. His gaze drifted, as if past the city itself, to a nostalgic corner of London. Also, he added, establish a permanent two-way teleportation anchor in Diagon Alley. Call it Port of Dawn. The announcement has been sent to all Pioneers' terminals via the Arcane contract network. The order was like a stone thrown into a still pond. Thousands of ripples spread through the pioneer community. A new pulse, commerce, was about to begin beating through the city's veins. The Weasley twins smelled money first. The moment the announcement hit, Fred and George raced to use their accumulated funds to rent prime space at the entrance to the living area. "George, can you hear a new era calling?" Fred joked. "No, Fred. What I smell is a mountain of galleons," George grinned. They put to use the primary alchemy production line Jason had opened to pioneers and subjected the gadgets they'd inventoried in the Hogwarts basement to wholesale industrial upgrades. 3 days later, Weasley Wizard Wheez's floating city flagship store opened to fanfare and fireworks. It became the liveliest sight in the living area. There were no human clerks. Instead, a dozen half-meter-tall alchemical puppets, charmingly designed, shuffled along the aisles on wobbly legs. 6 flexible mechanical arms let each puppet quote prices, package goods, and check out customers simultaneously and efficiently. When a pioneer picked up a box of skiving snack boxes, an alchemy puppet's electronic eye flashed red and announced in a tinny voice, 10 contribution points, no bargaining. This semi-automated model freed the twins to focus entirely on R&D while giving every wizard who entered the shop a novel experience. The store never emptied. Laughter, customers, and the puppets' mechanical prompts intertwined into the first chorus of the floating city's commerce. If the Weasleys' shop represented life's levity, Snape's new venture represented life itself. Jason had built an exclusive potion sanctuary for him, and their Snape used rare otherworld materials brought back at great risk by pioneers to produce a miraculous, potent healing draught he named Last Breath. The dark red, glowing potion restored any internal or external injury below a Tier 1 Arcanist almost instantly. For pioneers who survived day to day, the bottle was a second life. Across from Weasley's bright, noisy shop, Blackthorn Potions opened in muted, severe style. The shop, like its proprietor, was minimalist and forbidding. It sold only one finished product, Last Breath, at an astonishing price, and yet a long line always formed outside. Pioneers freshly returned from near-death experiences clutched their contribution points and queued with awed, hopeful faces. Snape also posted a notice offering high prices for any living, research-worthy magical plants from other worlds, using these acquisitions to enrich the collections of his private potion estate in a secluded valley of the floating city. A virtuous commercial cycle centered on life had begun. While others rushed to profit and survive, Hermione Granger turned to the forgotten corners. Her old ideal of house elf liberation returned, but she abandoned confrontation for practicality. Speaking with the house elves in the Hogwarts kitchens, she learned their greatest suffering wasn't bondage, but idleness. With so many students gone as pioneers, Hogwarts had become eerily empty. The elves, deprived of tasks and purpose, sank into low morale. Hermione offered a new plan. "Become the guardians of the ecological balance of the City of Dawn," she told them. She gave them a role full of honor and mission. The elves, who naturally loved labor and nurturing, would plant, cultivate, and maintain a wide variety of strange magic flora across the city's barren public areas. The offer lit a fire in the house elves. They found a meaningful direction for service and a new master they could take pride in, the great floating city itself. The result was gentle and beautiful. In the central square, once only stone and metal, Hermione and a chattering group of house elves carefully planted a patch of moongrass from another world that emitted a soft white light. When the first moongrass was successfully activated and its warm glow filled the square, the city seemed to inhale. Cold steel took on the first touch of green life. Vibrant scenes streamed into the central control room's light screen from countless surveillance feeds. In Weasley's shop, a pioneer had been blackened by a prank firework, prompting peals of laughter. Outside Snape's shop, a wizard who had just purchased a potion hugged it like a priceless treasure. In the central square, the moongrass swayed, its soft light pooling like a gentle sea, while house elves hummed off-key and watered the plants with spring water infused with life energy. The bustle of commerce, the hope for life, growth everywhere. This place was no longer a Cold War fortress. It was becoming a home, full of warmth and promise. It had its own pulse. Jason watched it all with a satisfied smile. The city's foundations were solid. Now it was time to build an indestructible god for the city. He raised his hand and cut the feeds to the living area cameras. At the same instant, over 90% of the floating city's energy, like rivers converging, was siphoned and surged into the sealed cultivation chamber behind him. The moment of ascension had finally arrived. 193. The plane is shaking. Third level Arcanist. The top meditation room lay at the heart of the floating city, directly connected to its energy core. Jason sat cross-legged in the center, eyes squeezed shut. Around him, the air was an ocean, so dense it seemed almost liquid, of arcane power. Golden and blue currents braided and flowed, forming visible tides. Every inhalation stirred dazzling ripples. Enormous reserves had been converted into pure energy and poured into this chamber without restraint. Its concentration could have torn any Arcanist below second order apart in an instant. Yet Jason's face was as calm and untroubled as an ancient iceberg. His mind had fused with the floating city. The city's energy conduits were his veins. Countless arcane runes were his nerve endings. The massive core suspended in the power room, rebuilt from goblin alloy and energy crystals, resonated with his soul. He was the city. The city was him. When the preparations reached the perfect critical point, Jason sent a single command from the depths of his consciousness. Begin. Boom. The energy ocean boiled. Endless power became violent torrents, pouring into every pore of his body. Soul ascension had begun. It was a forced, brutal remaking. If a second-order Arcanist's soul was a solid crystal, then that crystal was being smashed by an invisible hammer. Crack, crack. The shattering came not from outside, but from the core of himself. Pain rose far beyond the physical. It was the terrifying, tearing sensation of a life being forcibly lifted up. His consciousness and magic core were scoured and dispersed by the onrushing energy, reduced to primitive soul particles, and then completely fused with the floating city's energy core. His awareness stretched beyond the meditation room. He saw the whole city. He saw a moongrass plant unfold its leaves in Snape's potion manner. He heard an alchemical golem calling prices in a mechanical voice at Weasley's joke shop. He felt Hermione leading the house elves to water a newly cultivated plot. The city's pulse and his heartbeat became one. Then an even greater current flowed back from the merged core into his scattered soul. Reconstruction. With the city itself as furnace and near-infinite energy as fuel, his soul and magic core were being reforged into a higher dimensional form. That reconstruction shook the underlying rules of the magical world. In Hogwarts, Dumbledore had been about to sample a spoonful of honey lemon sherbet when the silver spoon in his hand froze. His sky-blue eyes narrowed. He looked up as if peering through the castle roof toward the faint silhouette of a steel kingdom above London. The silver instruments in his office hummed. The portraits of former heads fell silent, the painted faces betraying a sudden, instinctive fear. Fawkes, perched on his shoulder, cried out, feathers bristling as golden-red flames surged uncontrollably. "Quiet, Fawkes," Dumbledore murmured, focusing. What he sensed was not a mere fluctuation of magic. It was a plane resonance, the echo of a life leaping to a new level. Like throwing a new sun into a calm lake, its mass and heat would rewrite the surrounding balance. A pressure from a higher-order life washed over the magical world. It was not hostile, but it made even the most powerful spellcasters shudder to their core. "Merlin's beard," Dumbledore whispered. He really reached this step. In the floating city's potion laboratory, Snape watched a nearly finished brew boil violently and then spoil. The special alloy cauldron trembled out of control. The viscous liquid curdled and went bad. "Damn it," he cursed, but his eyes were pale with horror as he turned toward the seclusion room. As a member bound to the city, the pressure he felt was clearer and more terrifying than anyone's. A sensation like an ant suddenly aware of an entire mountain watching it. "Madman," Snape breathed, lips trembling. The reservoir of calm that was his heart was shaken like never before. The climax of the promotion arrived. When his soul and magic core were fully reforged, an irresistible force flung Jason's consciousness upward, tearing through the dimensions of the real world. He arrived in a void without time or space and saw the world's true face for the first time. Countless bands of light, laws of this plane, stretched like grains of sand in the Ganges, weaving an immense boundless net. At the net's core, an ancient neutral will slowly stirred. Cold and unfathomable, it was the concept of death itself, the end of reincarnation in this plane, the guardian of cosmic balance. When a newly ascended being with demigod-level power intruded on its domain, that ancient will turned its gaze. The gaze transcended sight. Jason felt his soul submerged in an absolute zero sea. Every thought and feeling froze. It was an audit, an assessment. The Grim Reaper bore no malice. It watched this new existence, equal in rank, to determine whether he would become a disruptive variable. Jason's consciousness stayed perfectly calm under that gaze, the kind of calm that would have broken most mortals. He met it directly. For a few seconds, yet stretching like centuries, a nascent god and an ancient god completed a silent declaration in terms of law. Then the cold will receded, sliding back into silence. It had acknowledged a new neighbor. Jason's awareness ebbed like a tide and returned to his body. In the top meditation room, the anomalies vanished. The boiling energy sea cleared and stilled. Every current had been absorbed. Jason opened his eyes slowly. Before, his eyes had flashed with the sharpness and brilliance of a genius. Now they were like two deep night skies, full of distant stars in the universe. Calm, indifferent, as if he had already seen through the essence of all things. His aura had changed fundamentally. The spark of genius had faded into a natural divinity, as though he had merged with the world itself. In the Arcanist hierarchy, Third Order is a demigod. He had succeeded. 194, the power of demigod, the shadow of the new semester. Name, Jason Lester, soulbound. Race, human, mixed blood. Class 33, mental power, 500, 500 physique, 200. Magic power, 8,000. Talents, memory palace, soul talent. Dexterous hands, soul talent. Exceptional comprehension, soul talent. Arcane heart, magic power talent. Third Order runes, comprehensive, 500. Third Order formations, comprehensive, 0500. Third Order meditation, Grandson Codex minor attainment, 2500. Third Order puppetry, comprehensive, 0500. Third Order alchemy, not initiated, 0200. Third Order potionology, not initiated, 200. Third Order botany, not initiated. Third Order biology, not initiated, 0200. Third Order spells, not initiated. First and Second Order arcane spells omitted. Master of the Floating City, City of Dawn, reaching demigod level at 13 was almost unheard of, even in worlds where the arcane arts had been honed for generations. A normal wizard might not attain such a thing in a lifetime. There was no oppressive presence in the air, but when the energy door of the top-tier meditation room slid open and Jason stepped out, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and even Snape, who had been waiting, each took an involuntary half-step back. It wasn't that Jason was aggressive. All his sharpness and vigor had been reined in. He simply stood there, and yet he became the center of the room. His presence drew the surrounding space toward him like a subtle gravity. The air itself seemed to tilt inward. His eyes were no longer the clear, youthful gaze they had been. They had deepened into two boundless, star-filled depths, as if they held the beginning and end of creation. Facing him felt like a mortal gazing up at a god, not with terror, but with an acute sense of smallness and a reverent awe born of a most primitive instinct. Jason, you. Hermione couldn't find words to express the pressure radiating from such a superior being. I succeeded, Jason said with a small smile. Now I'm a Third Order Arcanist. He lifted his right hand, palm up. A withered rose in a nearby vase floated into his palm and hovered there. In the Second Order, we learn and use rules, he said. The rose visibly and rapidly regained life. Its petals plumped with dew, its color returned. In the Third Order, his gaze deepened, we begin to try to write rules. Before anyone could respond, the rose in his hand sped through its entire life cycle. It budded, bloomed, withered, crumbled to dust, and from that dust reformed into a seed, all in a few seconds. This was beyond ordinary transfiguration or growth spells. It was the most intuitive, immediate demonstration of mastery over life and time. Everyone watched, stunned, the concept of demigod branded into their minds. Now, it's your turn. His gaze swept over the gathered faces and settled on the man standing quietly in the corner, eyes conflicted, Sirius Black. Mr. Black, Jason said with a smile, the scars Azkaban left on you end today. He stepped to Sirius, placed the same hand against his forehead, and a warm tide, brimful of arcane authority and sanctity, flowed into him. It felt like a purification drawn from the essence of life itself. Sirius trembled as his soul, ravaged by over a decade of wrongful imprisonment and dementors, was smoothed by those warm hands. The cold, despair, and madness ingrained in him melted away like snow in sunlight. Color returned to his face, the rigid slump of his shoulders eased, and by the time Jason withdrew his hand, the heir of House Black stood before them renewed, eyes blazing with vengeance and hope. "I feel." Sirius clenched his fists, awestruck at the lightness and power flooding him. "Your essence has been restored," Jason said. "Go into seclusion soon. With your talent, ascending to First Order will be as effortless as turning your hand." One by one, Jason blessed the others, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and the rest, using a sliver of his Third Order authority to perform essential optimizations. Harry's magical affinity rose, Hermione's mental resilience deepened, Ron felt the last traces of the spellcasting sluggishness vanish. These were fundamental upgrades, more profound than any potion or regimen. Then, Jason looked at the Weasley twins. With a casual snap, 2 crystals threaded with complex runelight flew into their hands. Inside are portable arcane protections, spellcasting tools, and instructions for crafting 3 grades of decoy dolls. The decoys come in 3 grades, made to withstand fatal blows from 0, 1st, and 2nd Order Arcanists, respectively. With them, Pioneers' survival rates will improve dramatically. The twins were ecstatic, grinning as if they'd found treasure. Jason then addressed everyone with precise, sweeping decisions that unfurled like a well-oiled mechanism, each move designed to unlock the floating city's potential. 0. Open the Zero Order meditation rooms to the public. Each room will cost 10 contribution points per day. Initially, 10,000 rooms will be made available. The public knowledge base will grant access up to First Order material, but exchanging for those permissions will require a great number of contribution points. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and the other core members, you will have access to Second Order permissions. These arrangements, support for companions, empowerment of ordinary wizards, elevated the entire City of Dawn to a new level. The summer holiday ended, and the 3rd year at Hogwarts began. The new defense against the dark arts professor, Remus Lupin, arrived as scheduled. Meanwhile, in the central control room of the floating city, Jason casually scrolled through the electronic edition of the Daily Prophet. The urgent headline that filled the page read, "Death Eater Remnant Peter Pettigrew escapes Azkaban last night." 195. Holy purification. Dementors are vulnerable. The news photo showed Peter's face, twisted with fear and malice. The entire magical world plunged into a fresh round of panic, but Jason's expression didn't change. 0. Initiate the full domain magic probe network. Begin tracking Peter's soul fluctuations and animagus form signatures. Command confirmed. Matching across the entire network using the Azkaban prison sample. Target locked. A vast map of the British wizarding world spread across the light display. A faint red dot scurried frantically through the countryside. Target mental fluctuation analysis. Core emotions, revenge and fear. Primary revenge targets identified. Jason Lester, Sirius Black, Harry Potter. Of course, Jason sneered. A rat that escapes its cage and still dreams of biting a lion. This absolute information advantage, this calm that saw through schemes and panics, was the mark of power. Ignore him, Jason said, closing the display. His voice was flat. He's a clown. Let him make a scene. We have more important things to handle. He knew the Ministry was in chaos over the escape, and that the monsters who feed on happiness were likely to appear. Platform 9 Poor, Hogwarts Express. Amid a clamor of goodbyes, the Scarlet Steam Train eased away. Jason and Harry sat with others in a quiet compartment. The countryside blurred past the window until the train suddenly lurched, slowed, then screeched to a halt. One by one, the carriage lights died. A bone-deep cold rolled through the compartment with an overwhelming sense of dread. Frost crept across the glass. The compartment door was drawn open by a rotted, scabbed, skeletal hand. A figure in black, faceless beneath its hood, drifted into the doorway. Dementors had boarded. The temperature plunged. Harry could see his breath. Despair, sharp and immediate, swept through their minds, an ache that could freeze the soul. Memories everyone had locked away threatened to spill out. Harry went pale as his mother's dying scream clawed back to him. Ron trembled with visions of spiders. Hermione bit her lip, eyes wide with fear. Even Professor Lupin, the newest occupant of the compartment, reached for his wand with a grave, instinctive motion. Only Jason stayed seated. His eyes, deep and unreadable, watched with something like boredom as the creature that fed on despair glided in. To him, the Dementor was nothing more than an aggregate of negative emotion and shadow energy, base and brittle. The thing sensed the particularly delicious pain in Harry and turned toward him with a soul-chilling gasp. Jason frowned almost imperceptibly. A sliver of golden aura, scorching and sacred as a sun flare, leaked from his demigod-level soul. It was so faint that Harry and the others didn't notice, but to the Dementor it was like facing the sun itself. An indescribable, horrifying scream tore through everyone's mind. The Dementor, as if beholding its worst enemy, shook its tattered cloak, spun around, and fled the compartment in a panicked tumble. Its retreat was a signal. The moment that pure divine purification touched the train, every Dementor on board felt it. They cried out, abandoned their prey, and scattered in wild flight from the carriages, as if a doomsday unmaking them were close behind. The cold receded like a tide. The lights flickered back on. Normalcy returned. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were left gasping. Lupin stared at Jason as if he had seen a ghost, disbelief written on his face. He half wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. When the Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station and the students stepped onto the platform still shaken, an even grimmer sight met them. Over Hogwarts, a mass of hundreds of Dementors swirled like a living black cloud, their chill blotting out the sky and casting Hogsmeade under an oppressive shadow. Merlin's beard. Has the Ministry gone mad? Did they bring every guard from Azkaban? An older student whispered, awed and terrified. The crowd assumed it was a Ministry deployment. As suffocation and despair settled over the village, Jason stepped off the train. He looked up at the roiling dark, brow tightening with impatience. He raised his right hand. From his palm, a golden halo, small as a wash basin at first, spread upward. Its expansion outpaced light. In an instant, it had swallowed the entire area around Hogwarts. Sacred Purification Domain. A law written by a third-order arcanist, bound here to permanence. Wherever the halo passed, the sky's cold and oppression were swept away, replaced by a warmth like the spring sun. The circling Dementors that touched its edge met the same fate as snow before a blaze. One by one, 10 by 10, hundreds of them melted, evaporating into motes of insignificant light that scattered harmlessly into the warm air. The black cloud dissolved. The sky cleared to blue. 196. Werewolf Classroom and Demigod's Gaze. The entire Hogsmeade Station fell silent. Students and professors who had come to greet them gaped at the impossibly clean sky and at the young man who slowly lowered his hand. The terrifying power the Ministry of Magic had assembled at great cost, enough to awe the whole wizarding world, had been wiped away with a casual flick. The Ministry's grand display had become a colossal joke. From that moment on, Jason became the sole, unquestioned guardian in the minds of every Hogwarts student. He ignored the awed, adoring, and fearful stares and turned to Harry and Hermione beside him. Let's go. Back to the castle. He knew that once the watchdogs outside were neutralized, the rat hiding in the shadows would be forced to take more extreme measures. The real confrontation would happen inside the castle. On the first morning after the sacred purification barrier was raised, Hogwarts woke to an unprecedented dawn. The sky was a crystal-clear blue, as if a god had wiped it clean. The faint chill and oppression that had hung over the castle were gone. Sunlight poured unimpeded across the lawns, warm and comforting. Students strolled in twos and threes, faces relaxed by the relief of having survived a disaster. They no longer whispered about escaped Death Eaters. Nearly every conversation, whether intentional or not, coalesced around the same name, Jason Lester. When Jason, Harry, and Hermione walked toward the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, corridor traffic instinctively stopped. Students watched silently, but it was no longer simple classmate rivalry. Their looks had turned to something like worship and reverence. He was no longer merely a student. He was a living monument, a guardian moving through Hogwarts. Good morning, everyone. In the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, the new professor, Remus Lupin, greeted them in a gentle voice. His robe, though patched in places, was immaculate. He looked tired, but his eyes were kind. His teaching style was a far cry from Lockhart's last year. No boasting, no grandstanding, just practical instruction and engaged interaction. In one lesson, he had already won the students over. Now, let's do something fun. Lupin smiled and pushed a rickety wardrobe to the center of the room. Can anyone tell me, what is a boggart? Hermione's hand shot up first, as usual. After she gave a perfect answer, Lupin began teaching how to fight this fear-feeding creature. Neville went first. His boggart turned into Snape and, under a ridiculous charm, ended up in a ridiculous dress. Then Ron. His fear became a giant spider put on roller skates and tumbling comically. Laughter filled the classroom. When it was Harry's turn, his expression grew serious. He gripped his wand, ready to face his deepest fear. Just as the boggart prepared to take shape, an invisible, vast will, like the sweep of the night sky, passed through the room. The boggart, poised to feed on Harry's terror, trembled as if an ant before divine wrath. It didn't transform. It let out a silent shriek and shrank back into the wardrobe in sheer panic. Jason had, with a single mental command, made the boggart skip Harry. Harry stood stunned, bewildered. Lupin, however, looked at Jason with gratitude mixed with deep confusion. He could feel a power beyond his understanding had just protected his student. After class, Lupin sought Jason out. "Mr. Lester," he said, voice filled with sincere thanks. "Thank you, for Harry and for the whole school." "It was nothing, Professor," Jason answered calmly. "You've done far more than nothing," Lupin said with a wry smile, studying Jason's eyes that seemed too deep to be merely human. "You're practically a miracle for Hogwarts." "I only cleared the pests outside," Jason replied meaningfully. "The rats in the castle will require a more patient approach." Lupin paused, not entirely sure what Jason meant, but he nodded solemnly. That evening, Severus Snape appeared at Lupin's office door and shoved a vial of potion onto the table with a sharp clack. Green smoke curled from it. "Here's your potion, Lupin. Try not to waste my precious ingredients." Lupin looked at the perfectly brewed wolfsbane potion, better than any he'd ever taken, and a complicated emotion passed across his face. "Thank you, Severus," he murmured. Snape snorted and turned to leave. From the floating city's central control room, Jason watched the scene through a miniature magical probe. With his insight as a third-order arcanist, he could tell that, beyond the potion's ingredients, Snape had embedded a subtle arcane mark for tracking. Hard to detect, crude in structure, but unmistakable. It was a new trick Snape, a first-order arcanist, had likely devised under Jason's nudging. Jason smiled inwardly. He did not have to do everything himself. With well-placed hints and a precise understanding of human nature, Dumbledore, Snape, and others could be moved like pawns, each advancing his plan. His courtesy to Lupin and his reading of Snape's intentions were only surface-level displays of a demigod's composure. True hunting required efficient tools. Jason stood before the central light screen of the floating city and issued an order. 0. Initiate a full-range, deep-level magic scan of Hogwarts Castle. Search mode. Filter for animagus transformation fluctuations not registered with the Ministry of Magic. Instruction confirmed. Full domain scan initiated. Comparing with Ministry of Magic's official animagus registry. Filtering anomalous magic fluctuations. A three-dimensional map of Hogwarts unfolded on the screen, streams of data cascading down the display. Seconds later, a marker flashed red on a location in Gryffindor Tower. Scan complete. One anomalous target found. Target form, brown rat, Rattus norvegicus. Life characteristics highly unstable, showing high frequency, subtle switches between human and rodent form magical fluctuations. The target experiences intermittent disappearances from the map marker. Jason watched the red dot with a cold expression. The hunt had officially begun. 197. Rats in the walls and silent provocation. In the days after the Holy Purification Barrier was erected, Hogwarts settled into a golden calm. The barrier Jason had put in place wrapped the castle like a gentle, unsetting sun. It drove away the Dementors and seemed to wash clean the cold, oppressive aura that had clung to the ancient stone for centuries. Sunlight felt brighter, the air warmer in a way that made everyone comfortable. Students' faces wore real ease and peace. The panic from Peter Pettigrew's escape had long since been erased by that miraculous cleansing. In their minds, Hogwarts was no longer just a school of magic, but a sanctuary under the protection of a living demigod. Conversations in the corridors, meals in the Great Hall, even Peeves's antics all seemed a little more cheerful than before. Beneath that outward calm, however, a few people carried an invisible tension. In the Gryffindor common room, Harry flipped through Quidditch through the ages, but kept glancing toward the door. Any sudden shape would make him tighten the grip on the wand he kept hidden in his sleeve. Hermione had given up trips to the library and stayed by Jason's side, a thick, ancient magic dictionary in her lap, half her attention on the book, the rest on watching her surroundings. Ron was on edge. Every tiny squeak sent him jumping. Their outward calm and inward strain stood in stark contrast to the rest of their classmates. They knew better than anyone that beneath the seemingly impregnable sunlight, a venomous, cunning snake still lurked in the castle's deepest shadows. That snake was Peter Pettigrew. In a crumbling crevice along an unused fourth-floor corridor, a dirty brown rat was curled in the dark. Its small red eyes glinted with malice and fear as it listened with hypervigilance to every sound. Pettigrew was far more cunning and resilient than anyone imagined. Years on the run had turned him into a survival expert. He understood exactly what monster he faced, a prodigy barely 13 who had made hundreds of Dementors vanish with a wave of his hand. To confront him directly would be suicide, so Pettigrew pushed his survival instincts to the limit. Like a drop of sewage sinking into the sea, he used his knowledge of every secret passage and wall crevice to hide within the castle's ancient veins. He never stayed in one place more than an hour, ghosting from hiding spot to hiding spot, avoiding any corner that might hold invisible scrutiny. He could feel an unseen net spread over the entire castle. The routine scans from the floating city hung over him like the sword of Damocles, allowing no ease. He wasn't reconciled to his fate. It was Jason Lester who had ruined everything. If not for him, Pettigrew would still be the pampered pet in a heroic family, waiting for his master's return. Now he was an escaped convict from Azkaban, hunted by everyone. That hatred burned hotter than his fear and pushed him to take risks. He dared not attack outright, but he began a series of provocations, small, precise, and plausibly Peeves' work. On Tuesday in Potions, Snape was in full, drawn-out rebuke mode over a Hufflepuff who had added porcupine quills too early. The dungeon thrummed with his chilly presence. Then, in the furthest corner of the classroom, a cauldron brewing a shrinking potion changed of its own accord. It let out a muffled plop as if some invisible hand had pinched it inward. A green, acidic liquid shot up like a fountain and hissed as it corroded the ceiling. Peeves! Snape's face went black as a pot. He bellowed into the air, blaming the poltergeist, without once noticing that the acid had eaten away a small, inconspicuous protrusion in the ceiling, one almost indistinguishable from the stonework. 2 days later, Madame Pince emitted a scream loud enough to pierce a silencing charm. In the restricted section, a unique volume recording ancient castle defense runes had been eaten by a corrosive, dark arts liquid, a charred hole burned through its center. The complex rune patterns were ruined. The school buzzed, and everyone blamed Peeves, professors included. After all, who would imagine that anyone would dare such acts in a castle guarded by a demigod? In the floating city, central control room, 2 holographic recordings played side by side on the huge light screen, one showing the potion dungeon, the other the restricted section. Jason sat in the commander's chair, his finger tracing the air to freeze and enlarge images. Harry and Hermione stood behind him, watching with grim faces. "It was Peter, wasn't it?" Harry asked, voice low, eyes on the corroded cauldron. "It was him." Jason's tone was calm. He tapped the screen. Blue lines, energy flow diagrams, appeared over both recordings. In the potions footage, an extremely faint but highly concentrated energy signature, like a surgical blade, had severed the magic balance in the cauldron and triggered a directional blast. In the library footage, a small drop of black liquid had appeared out of nowhere, its descent calculated to strike precisely the core rune page. "This doesn't look like a prank." Hermione's brows knit as she studied the energy readouts. Both destructions were too precise. No excess energy leaked. Peeves' pranks are chaotic. This was a surgical operation. "Good analysis, Hermione," Jason nodded. He swept his hand and pulled up 3D structural models of both scenes. At the damaged spots, faint markers glowed, originally blue, now red. "Look here and here." He pointed to the markers. "These are my newly deployed second-generation miniature magic nodes. They're covert and energy efficient, meant to form a surveillance network covering every corner of Hogwarts without blind spots. The exploding cauldron took out node number 3 on the potion's classroom ceiling. The corroded book sat right against node number 7 in the interlayer of the restricted section shelves. Hermione's eyes widened. He's not randomly vandalizing things. He knows about the nodes. He's attacking your surveillance system. More accurately, Jason said, a cold amusement in his voice as he looked at the two shocked faces. He's clearing minds. Clearing minds? Harry echoed blankly. Yes, clearing minds. Jason's gaze deepened, as if he could see the rat skittering through the walls. This rat is smarter than I expected. He's using minimal means to create chaos that can easily be blamed on Peeves while probing my network one piece at a time. Each success maps a blind spot in his mind. He smiled, slightly playful. He's taunting me silently. I know you're watching, but you can't catch me. He's forcing me to upgrade my surveillance, Jason continued, eyes gleaming like a chess player facing an intriguing opponent. If I widen detection to trap him, I'll reveal more of my methods. Detection frequencies, energy signatures, reaction times. He'll capture that data. This is an interesting game, a silent war in the dark. Harry and Hermione felt a chill. What they had assumed would be a simple capture was actually a complex contest of wits and tactics. They had never imagined the scale of strategy involved. But the game's over, Jason said, his smile draining away. His eyes returned to the impartial majesty expected of a demigod. If he wants to play, I'll play big. I'm better at psychological warfare. That night, the castle slept under moonlight. Peter, in rat form and exhausted from a day of anxious probing, squeezed through a hole in a wall only a rat could use. He was deep in Gryffindor Tower, in a forgotten storeroom of old armor and moth-eaten tapestries, his safest temporary hideout. When he poked his head out, every hair stood on end. He froze as if hit by petrificus totalis. In the center of his hideout, atop the rag and cotton nest he'd made, lay a small piece of cheese, its rich aroma irresistible. Gruyere from Switzerland, his favorite when he had a master and a warm place. And beside that fatally tempting morsel, letters of small golden script had been etched into the dusty floor by magic. The words glowed like a verdict and pierced him. Eat. This is your last meal. Squeak. A shrill, distorted scream erupted from Peter as terror took him. He scrambled, tumbled, and fled, paws scrabbling across stone. He knew he was exposed. All his hiding, all his probing, all his cunning, seen from the other side of an all-seeing gaze, had become an absurd one-man performance watched with amused interest. The realization that he was monitored from an omniscient vantage, with nowhere to run, felt like a cold hand around his heart. It threatened to break his mind and drive him to even more desperate, irreversible acts. 198. Perfect bait and prelude to hunting. The phrase "last meal" had been seared into Peter Pettigrew's miserable, despicable soul like a red-hot brand. A cold, overwhelming fear gripped him so tightly that he could barely breathe. It haunted him day and night. He abandoned all half-hearted attempts at sabotage and spent his days as a rat, hiding in the darkest, filthiest corners of the castle, every breath a shudder of dread. He felt watched by an omniscient eye in the sky, a torment worse than facing a Dementor in Azkaban. Floating city, central control room. On the huge light screen, a flickering red dot moved erratically over a map of Hogwarts, but its movements always, whether by accident or design, circled near the humping willow. 0. Analyze target's behavior pattern, Jason said, his voice echoing through the empty control room. Behavior analysis initiated. Target in acute stress. Mental stability near collapse. Movement shows two conflicting drives, escape and hesitation. Conclusion. Target intends to flee Hogwarts through the Shrieking Shack's secret passage, but driven by hatred and refusal to surrender, cannot let go of the idea of revenge. Torn between two extremes, he is a highly unstable bomb. Very good. Jason watched the screen with eyes as calm as still water. It's time. Life's been too dull. Let him provide some entertainment. In the Gryffindor common room, the firelight threw solemn shadows on several young faces. Jason had sealed off the entire corner with an arcane barrier, so their conversation could not be overheard. Harry, Hermione, and Ron sat around him, while above the fireplace, a charmed two-way mirror showed Sirius Black's handsome face, distorted by rage. "He's in the castle, that bloody rat!" Sirius snarled at the mirror, his voice raw. Jason, Harry, let me in. I can catch him alive before he slips through a crack in the stone. I'll kill him with my own hands. I'll make him pay for James and Lily. Harry's fists clenched, his anger fanned by Sirius's fury. Jason, Sirius is right. We can't wait any longer. No, Jason's single word calmed both men instantly. He shook his head, his gaze sweeping over them like a steady hand. I understand your anger, Sirius, but not now. Why? Sirius demanded. Because Peter is a cornered animal. Jason said patiently. He knows this castle's secret passages better than any of us. If we rush in, he'll flee at all costs. In Hogwarts' labyrinthine layout, a rat determined to escape is almost impossible to catch. Once he gets out, finding him will be extremely difficult. Then what? Just watch him run around? Ron asked, restless. We won't catch him. Jason's lips curved into a meaningful smile. We won't chase him. We'll make him walk into the cage we've prepared. Seeing their puzzled expressions, he laid out his plan slowly. We must give him an opportunity he can't refuse, a once-in-a-lifetime chance, one he believes will let him turn the tables with a single strike. His voice was calm, like a chess player making a decisive move. I'll put out a story. I'll claim that through my studies of ancient arcane arts and potion lore, I've discovered a ritual that can completely eradicate the werewolf curse. The ritual is real, but will tailor its details specifically to attract Peter. He raised one finger. First, the ritual is extremely dangerous and complex. It requires the peak power of moonlight on a full moon night to remold the recipient's soul and blood. During the ritual, I, as the caster, and Professor Lupin, as the recipient, will have our minds and magic drained completely. We'll be utterly exhausted and vulnerable for a short time. A second finger came up. Second, the ritual must be performed somewhere secluded and free from magical interference. In all of Hogwarts, the Shrieking Shack best meets that condition. Its history and echoing magics make it the perfect location. He looked out the window at the moon, already growing toward fullness. And the time will be the next full moon. Silence fell over the common room. Harry, Ron, and Sirius absorbed the plan. Hermione stared at Jason with a near-reverent look, fully aware of the dangerous genius of it. This was perfect bait, crafted expressly for Peter Pettigrew. To Peter, what did this mean? A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The demigod who terrified him to his marrow would become weak. Remus Lupin, his old victim, would be defenseless. The location was the Shrieking Shack, the place Peter knew better than anyone. If he seized that chance, he could get revenge on both enemies at once, and he could claim the glory of curing lycanthropy, a feat that would transform him from a hated traitor into a celebrated hero. He might even capture the weakened Jason and hand him to his old master. The lure was immense, enough to overcome his fear of death and ignite his miserable gambling heart. This is simply... Sirius muttered to the mirror, his furious energy replaced by stunned admiration. Only now did he see that Jason's power wasn't just raw strength. It was a masterful understanding of human hearts and the ability to orchestrate the world. Now we need a reliable mouthpiece to leak this news, Jason said, breaking the silence. His gaze seemed to pierce the castle walls and reach out to Malfoy Manor, where a figure waited to carry out his orders. He took a piece of parchment and, using encrypted arcane methods, wrote a single sentence. An owl at the window took the note and flew away. Hours later, in a dark pub in Nocturne Alley, a newly freed Death Eater heard a rumor from a shadowy informant that made his pulse race. Have you heard? That kid Lester from Hogwarts thinks he's clever. Planned some curse eradication ritual for that werewolf, Professor Lupin, at the Shrieking Shack on the next full moon. They say the ritual will cost him half his life. The rumor, like a stone tossed into a black pond, rippled outward and reached the terrified, greedy rat hiding in the sewers. The full moon was coming. The Shrieking Shack, where old grudges and betrayals had been sealed for over a decade, was about to become the stage for final judgment. All the players, willing or unwilling, were taking their positions. The prelude to the hunt had begun. 199, Full Moon Night, Reunion at the Shrieking Shack. It was the night of the full moon. Cold moonlight, like spilled mercury, washed the Hogwarts grounds in a pale, frosty sheen. A wind howled through the treetops of the Forbidden Forest, carrying mournful keening that sharpened the chill in the air. The homping willow thrashed its branches wildly in the gusts, a furious giant refusing any living thing to come near. At the edge of its reach, Jason guided a pale, staggering man forward, careful and deliberate as they approached the violent, ancient tree. Professor Remus Lupin looked terrible, cold sweat beaded on his brow, breath short and ragged, each step seeming to draw the last of his strength. He clutched Jason's arm, most of his weight leaning on the young man. "Hold on, Professor," Jason said, his voice carrying a purposefully strained urgency. "We're nearly there." Not far behind them, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood with wands ready, faces etched with worry as they watched. Jason had ordered them to stay and keep guard. They were not to advance. Hermione pressed her lips together so tightly she looked as if she might burst. If Jason had not been so unarguable in his command, she would have rushed forward long ago. When they reached the edge of the willow's range, Jason tapped a small, inconspicuous knot at the base of the trunk with his wand. The hopping willow stilled at once, branches drooping as if it had fallen asleep. The knot gave way, revealing a dark opening. Jason half-dragged, half-supported Lupin into the passage that led beneath the tree to the shrieking shack. Their movements were slow, cautious, every footfall measured, as if expecting an attack to spring from the dark at any second. The performance was flawless. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and decay. They walked until a faint light appeared ahead. They pushed up a trapdoor and stepped into Hogwarts' most feared building. The shrieking shack was a ruin of dust and moonlight, pale shafts falling through broken windows onto a floor of grime. Wallpaper hung in torn strips, and furniture lay beneath thick white sheets like silent corpses. Lupin stumbled to a broken chair and collapsed, panting loudly, his body convulsing in apparent agony. Jason leaned against a wall, face pale, breath ragged, looking spent, as if he had poured every ounce of energy into getting them here. The trap was set. Silence settled, heavy and expectant. Every mote of dust seemed to hang with the weight of waiting. From the darkest corner of the room, a small, wretched figure crawled into the light as if seeping from the shadows. Peter Pettigrew, rat-like, half-hidden, small eyes glittering with a fierce, unhinged joy, held his wand tight and pointed it at the two seemingly helpless figures. His voice was a hoarse, thin thing, full of vicious pleasure. "Lupin, Lupin," he hissed, "your time has come." He stared at Jason's feigned weakness and Lupin's apparent suffering, and long-suppressed fear in him curdled into greedy, venomous hope. The cure for the werewolf curse, capture the supposed demigod, curry favor with the Dark Lord. 1,000 frantic fantasies flew through his mind. He raised his wand, intent on striking. Before he could, a sound cut across the shack like thunder. Roar! A roar, pent up for more than a decade and full of hatred and fury, exploded through the room. Wood splintered as another entrance burst open, and a vast, ink-black dog bolted into the shack like a streak of night. Sirius had acted too soon. His hatred had pushed him into the open. The black dog's eyes fixed only on the small figure. It was a living shadow, a bolt of pitch-black lightning, and it crashed into Pettigrew with savage force. Behind the dog, another figure lunged through the breach. Severus Snape. Anger flashed across his pale face at the sight of Sirius ruining the plan, but when his gaze landed on Pettigrew, that anger curdled into a colder, deeper hate. He moved like a man who had no choice. "Petrificus totalis," Snapey barked. A red jet blasted from his wand. Pettigrew shrieked and twisted, trying to evade, but the dog battered him to the floor before the curse could fully take hold. The two grappled, man and beast, Sirius tearing with teeth, Pettigrew wild with desperate spells and high, panicked screams. Snape stood nearby, firing black bolts of newly devised malediction at the struggling rat. He called the hexes like a surgeon's incantations, mixing arcane syllables into cruel, precise strikes. "Arcane! Poison to the marrow!" one of the curses hissed. Each black spark that struck Pettigrew did not rend flesh so much as make him howl as if poisoned needles sank into his very soul. The scene became a maelstrom of noise and hate, Pettigrew's terror and hatred, Sirius's blinded fury, Snape's cold, surgical cruelty, and then Lupin's pretended agony stopped being an act. Outside the window, the full moon hung high and unsparing. Its light called to something savage in his blood. His bones began to snap and grind with a sickening sound, joints contorting, muscles seizing. His face warped, his form convulsed and reformed. The shrieking shack turned into a cauldron of pain and rage, every sound amplified by the rawness of what was happening inside. Everyone was pulled into their own spiral of feeling. No one noticed the young man against the wall straighten. Jason's pallor and false exhaustion vanished like mist. Calm settled over him, steady and deep as an ancient well. The thin mask of effort fell away, leaving a dispassionate, almost indifferent expression, like a god watching a mortal tragedy unfold. Sirius's premature charge had ruined the elegant trap Jason had woven, but it mattered little. Jason watched the chaos before him, and with the quiet gesture of someone used to making things happen, he snapped his fingers. The snap rang crisp in the air, a small sound that carried absolute command. Instantly, every door, every window, every crack and seam in the shrieking shack sealed. Invisible runes flared and braided across the inner walls, and a faint golden curtain shimmered into being, cloaking the room from the outside world. The shack became a world apart, closed and complete. Tonight's spectacle was only beginning. Catching a rat was the smallest task Jason had set for himself. In this sealed space, he would cleanse a friend's curse, and he would force two men blinded by hatred to confront the paths they had chosen. For him, an impossible, terrible thing called a demigod, this was never mere judgment. It was also, and always, a chance at salvation. 200. Reckoning. In my name, I will reshape the rules. 200 Reckoning. In my name, I will reshape the rules. Inside the shrieking shack, time seemed frozen in amber. The aftershock of Jason's snap had transformed the place into a sealed courtroom. Faint golden arcane runes flashed across the walls, doors, and windows, closing off every exit. The chaotic scene, however, did not stop. Peter Pettigrew was pinned to the floor beneath the large black dog, Sirius, emitting terrified squeaks that hovered somewhere between human and rodent. Severus Snape stood nearby, wand in hand, his pale face a mask of cold disgust. The tip of his wand occasionally pulsed with the pale glow of a Tier 1 arcane weakening ray. Each beam smashed into Pettigrew, making his attempts to shift back into his animagus form fail and shredding his magic so that agony rolled through him to the bone. This was the first practical application of that learned arcane, and its effect was brutal. On the other side of the room, Lupin's transformation had reached a terrible, apparently irreversible stage. "Roar! Ah!" he howled, collapsing to his knees. His body convulsed and elongated. Bones grated as they broke and reshaped, gray fur forcing its way through skin. The werewolf curse, the nightmare that had haunted him for half his life, showed its most hideous face under the moonlight. Jason watched the chaos without a flicker of panic. He stepped forward with the calm of someone who had seen 1,000 storms and found them tedious. There was something in his eyes, vast and cool as the night sky, that made him seem indifferent to the terror around him. "All of you." His voice was light but carried weight that settled into everyone's bones. "Stop." At his word, a higher-level law, imperceptible even to ordinary magic, spread out and wrapped the room. Tier 3 Arcane, Forbidden Area. Sirius, mid-snap at Pettigrew, froze in place, a snarling statue. Snape, about to fire another weakening ray, was halted with his wand suspended. Pettigrew himself went rigid, unable even to roll his eyes. They were like specimens trapped in resin, immobile and exposed. Lupin did not freeze entirely. His curse was tied to deeper planar laws, but his movements slowed to a grotesque slow motion. Every twitch and contortion was stretched out, painfully visible. Jason didn't bother with a long speech. He raised his hand and, with a casual flick, summoned a massive light screen on the empty wall. On it, a sequence of undeniable truths began to play, evidence assembled by Zero Puppet and traced through arcane means. The first scene, the rainy night in Godric's Hollow, a small figure bowing to a cloaked man and revealing the Potter's hiding place. The second, the Weasley household, family life at the Burrow, Scabbers dozing by Ron's bed and sneaking crumbs beneath the table, eyes flashing with an unnerving human cunning. The third, a dark nocturne alley pub where Peter in human form took sly words from a surviving Death Eater about Jason's ritual for Lupin on full moon night, the ugly greed and malice on his face recorded in clear detail. The evidence was overwhelming. Jason released the restraints on Snape and Sirius. Snape fixed his gaze on the screen. The emotions rolling across his face were tangled, guilt over Lily, old jealousy of James, hardening into a white-hot hatred for the figure on the floor. Sirius changed back to human form. Watching the betrayal of his best friend play out, his eyes reddened and two hot tears ran down his cheeks. For the first time since the nightmarish revelations began, the disgust and contempt Snape had shown toward Lupin ebbed, replaced by a complicated mix of sympathy and guilt. Jason turned to Lupin, who was still caught in slowed, agonized metamorphosis, and addressed the two men beside him, who now burned with righteous fury. "Take care of him," he said. "I want him free from the suffering of the full moon from now on." He walked slowly toward the trembling Lupin. "His crimes will be judged by you," he continued, directing his words at Snape and Sirius. "Decide whether to hand him over to the Ministry of Magic or to execute him on the spot." The casual way Jason entrusted the fate of their enemy to them, rather than killing him himself, was a display of authority more powerful than vengeance. He no longer clung to the grievances of the past. He intended to remake the rules of the world in his name. Jason extended his right hand, palm up. From thin air, a miniature sun bloomed, burning with golden flames. The condensed form of pure sun-true fire, its law of life advanced to Tier 3 under the Grand Sun Codex. It was an absolute bane to darkness and curse. He laid the blazing orb against Lupin's partially wolfish forehead, already streaked with gray fur. "In my name, strip away, purify," he intoned in ancient, majestic, arcane syllables. The sun-true fire, combined with Jason's absolute authority over life and purification, was like a precise surgical blade. It seized Lupin's soul origin and dove into his bloodline, burning and stripping the werewolf curse that had tormented him for decades. The painful transformation was forced to reverse. Lupin's howls slowly became groans of relief. The black, venomous-looking veins under his skin, manifestations of the curse, melted and washed away under the golden flames. Growing claws and fangs regressed, nails and teeth softening and returning to human form. As the last trace of black energy flared and turned to ash, Lupin collapsed, fully human at last. He opened his eyes weakly, clearer, lighter, shining with a freedom he had not known in years. Tears finally broke loose. He seized the hand Jason offered, choking on emotion, unable to form words. Sirius and Snape exchanged a long, loaded look. The old knot between them, wound tight by years of pain, guilt, loyalty, and the shared horror of betrayal, began to unwind under the weight of what they had just witnessed. Without another word, they moved together toward the despicable traitor who still lay bound on the floor, shaking so hard with fear that he had soiled himself. Their faces were cold as frost.